Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. Where are you going, love? My mother asked me, as she saw me heading straight for the front door with Lassie, my golden retriever, devotedly at my side. Lassie was wagging her blonde tail furiously and letting out a few excited yaps. I was a bolshy 14-year-old teenager at the time and felt distinctly peeved that my mother couldn't see where I was going. Was it not blindingly obvious? Did I actually have to spell it out to her? Was she really that dumb? I'm taking Lassie for a walk, I said in an indignant, almost inaudible mumble. I wish you would speak up, love, my mother complained. Why are you always mumbling under your breath so that I can hardly hear you? You're taking Lassie for a walk at this time of the day, are you? She said, looking affronted, her face crinkling up into a big frown. Jack, it's 5:10, for goodness sake. Why did you not take Lassie out earlier, after you returned home from school? You know how I feel about you leaving the house at this time of day. I made a face at my mother and answered somewhat testily. I had tons of homework to do, Mum. I wanted to get my homework done first, before I took Lassie out for her walk. I was waylaid, because I had so much homework to do. It took longer than I bargained for it to take. Mrs. Smith made us write an essay called The Picnic. I couldn't think what to write about. I hated when she makes us write fictional stories. It's a struggle to know what to write about. And it's not allowed to be a true story. Mrs. Smith is trying to encourage us to tap into our imaginations, and I just don't have one. Oh, so it's Mrs. Smith's fault, is it, Jack? Don't go putting this on your English teacher, said my mother in a contemptuous snort. You always make excuses, don't you, Jack? It's the story of your life. One excuse after another, if you ask me. You're just like your father in that way. You're one of the worst procrastinators known to man, always putting everything off until the very last minute, just like taking Lassie for a walk. How many times have I told you, Jack, dear, that I want you to take Lassie for a walk when you return home from school? After you've eaten your sandwich and drunk your juice, of course. When you've given her a walk, then you can worry about your homework afterwards. That's how we've always done things around here. I don't like you going out at this time of the day when the traffic will pick up as people return home from work. And there are many more cars out on the road there, which isn't a good idea when you're walking a dog. Besides anything else, I like you children to be at home at 5 o'clock, not wandering off to do your own thing as you will. Me and your father like your lives to be run on some kind of manageable, regimental, well-structured schedule. And never have you once taken Lassie out at this late time of day before. And this can't happen again, Jack. Have I made myself absolutely clear? But, Mum, Lassie hasn't had a walk yet. It's not that busy on the roads. It never really is in this neighbourhood. It's always been peaceful around here. I don't know what all the fuss is about. It's no big deal. Besides, I'm going the way of the doggy park, where many people who've returned home from work walk their dogs. Lassie's very social. She really likes meeting with other people's dogs. Mr. Lehman from number 48 has a labradoodle called Jetski, who Lassie really, really likes. I think it would be so nice for Lassie to meet up with him again. Jetski is a beautiful dog with an amazing temperament, and Lassie really, really likes him. My mother let out a disgruntled sigh that revealed how silently outraged she really was with me. I always knew when I ruffled my mother's feathers, and this was one of those quintessential moments. So you had this all planned out, did you, Jack? For Lassie to have an amorous liaison with a labradoodle called Jetski? I know the dog well enough. I've seen him around and about, and you're right, he's a handsome specimen with a very friendly nature. I happen to know from Mr. Lehman that Jetski is unneutered. Lassie has not been done yet. The last thing I need is for us to have 8 little puppies rolling around the place. I hope you aren't harvesting any funny ideas in that head of yours, Jack. I wouldn't be surprised if you were up to something sneaky like this. I wouldn't put anything past you to come up with an idea like this, bringing those 2 dogs together for ulterior motives, so to speak. I will admit that my face betrayed my clandestine motives by flushing a bright pink colour, because my mother was absolutely on to me, whether she knew it or not. As it happens, I had talked with Mr. Lehman at great length about his labradoodle, who hadn't been neutered yet, as Mr. Lehman couldn't stand the idea of neutering his dog, but he did agree with me that mixing Lassie's DNA with his dog Jetski was a swell idea indeed. I hadn't told him, of course, that my mother would be having kittens if she had the remotest inkling about this rather disingenuous conniving plan of mine. I knew that Lassie was definitely in season, so taking her to the doggy park was a great idea, in the serendipitous hope that me and Lassie might accidentally, on purpose of course, run into Mr. Lehman and his stunning golden labradoodle Jetski. I mean, what was the harm in tempting fate and destiny to a helping hand? I'd wholeheartedly promised Mr. Lehman, of course, that if Lassie got pregnant with Jetski's virulent sperm, that he could have first choice of one of the puppies that Lassie conceived, and he seemed very pleased with this idea. "How do your parents feel about Jetski impregnating Lassie?" he had asked me with concern in his voice. "I hope they're on board with this idea. I wouldn't want them thinking that Jetski is going around the neighbourhood, impregnating all the female dogs at will, for I wouldn't let him do that." "Oh," I said, shrugging my shoulders nonchalantly, and looking as innocent as I possibly could. "My parents think it's a great idea, Mr. Lehman. My mother's committed to the plan, provided you agree, of course. She believes the combination of the 2 breeds will bring about the most adorable, irresistible puppies that no one will be able to resist," I lied enthusiastically. Mr. Lehman continued to look pleased. He rubbed his hands together. "I was not thinking of Jetski impregnating a golden retriever, I must admit. The idea had never occurred to me, until you suggested it, of course. But there is no doubt that Lassie is a fine, splendid-looking dog, and as good-looking as mine is. And I think your mother's right. The puppies will very definitely be highly sought after. Blending their DNAs together will bring forth the most beautiful puppies you've ever seen. I want first pick of the litter, if that's all right." "But of course, Mr. Lehman," I had said. "I wouldn't have it any other way. You'll get the first choice of all of the puppies." "I'm very glad to hear it. I tell you what, young man. When Lassie here is in season, you come to the doggy park at about 5 p.m, said Mr. Lehman. "That's when I tend to get back home from work, and that's when you will find me walking my dog in the park. I'm sure it won't take a few minutes for Jetski to do the deed," he said, giving me a wink. As I was reflecting over my clandestine duplicitous motives for going to the doggy park on this occasion, my sister began to study my face rather curiously. Then she let out a rather raucous chuckle. Not the kind of noise that is very becoming for a 12-year-old girl, mind you, who tends to chuckle like a rooster, like my sister so obviously does. "Look! Jack's going as red as a tomato!" she cried out with laughter. My sister Angie was wearing a big "I got you" grin on her face. I do believe you're on to something, Mum. Jack wants Lassie to have puppies, don't you, Jack? That's why you're conveniently going to the doggy park at this time. You want to run into jet ski. We're not all idiots, you know. It's not about your homework taking up all your time today. You had this all strategically planned out, didn't you? I know what you're like. I can't think what you're talking about, I said in my own defence, with a very straight face, my skin burning red from my lies. If I carried on like this, my nose would grow as long as Pinocchio's. My mother continued to frown. She studied me through suspicious, narrowing eyes. Well, I hope none of this is true, Jack, and that you aren't deliberately attempting to have Lassie impregnated by jet ski. I would hope you wouldn't do something underhanded like this. The sooner I take that dog of yours to be done, the better, she snapped. The last thing we need is for Lassie to get pregnant. I couldn't stand for any of that. But you can't do that to her, Mum. I want Lassie to have lots of puppies at some point in time. I think she deserves the privilege of becoming a mother. Imagine if you hadn't been allowed to have children. How would you feel about that? Imagine if you had been forced to have the snip. I bet you wouldn't like that. My mother shook her head furiously. It's not the same, Jack, and you know it. Dogs aren't the same as people. Most people have their dogs done. It's pretty routine these days. And it's about time we attended to Lassie in that regard. You're wrong, Mum. Dogs are exactly like people. Sometimes they're a lot better than people are, because unlike people, they never ever judge you. You could smell like a dumpster, look like you've been dragged through a hedge backwards, and a dog will unconditionally love you, while people will be quick to tear you apart limb from limb, like a team of hungry coyotes. For your information, Lassie is my very best friend. I think she'd love to have a litter of puppies at some point. She'd make a fabulous mum. I don't want to discuss this matter with you any more, Jack. It's pointless to argue about something so nonsensical. And as for jet ski, make sure you keep Lassie away from him while you go on your walk. I have a horrible feeling Lassie could actually be in season, and I'm not joking either. Come to think of it, I do remember spotting some blood on your duvet the other day, and I don't want to be dealing with a litter of puppies. I don't know why on earth Mr. Lehman is so adverse to getting his dog neutered. People around here who take their dogs to the doggy park should be more responsible about getting their dogs done. I suppose I'm a fine one to talk. Anyway, you would think the vet was giving Mr. Lehman the procedure himself, not his dog. If that man allows jet ski to impregnate our Lassie, I will personally castrate him myself. See if I don't. What are some men like? You say the word castration to them, and they practically close their legs so tightly together and look mortified by the word. Just so you know, Jack, Gertie is coming to dinner tonight, as she does every Friday. She should be here at 6:30. I thought you'd help me peel some of the vegetables for supper tonight and help me lay the table. But you impulsively going to the dog park at this very inconvenient time, when I could do with your help, well, everything's been waylaid, has it not? Gertie was my mother's sister, and every Friday night, like clockwork, she came to dinner with our family. My mother's mother had died even before I was born, in a tragic horse-riding accident when my mother was only 23 years old. My mother's sister Gertie, who had never had children of her own, had become a so-called substitute grandmother figure for us in our lives, although me and my sister had never considered her to be a loving matriarch figure like that, and neither did either of us warm to her. She was the kind of person you took in very small doses. She was dictatorially opinionated about things, and could sometimes be downright rude, as if she had absolutely no filter to tether her emotions. I gather my mother's mother had been her intrinsic opposite in every way, the kind of very gentle soul who was careful with her words, and who would never choose to willingly cause offence, and unlike her sister Gertie, had always loved animals from horses to dogs without exception. Gertie had never understood her sister's love for animals, because she thought most animals were filthy, dirty, and unhygienic at the very best of times, and made no secret of this fact. According to my mother, her own mother had been an elegant, demure woman, a woman of few words. But by contrast, Gertie could garrulously talk until the cows came home. Sometimes it was almost impossible to get her to leave on a Friday night, because it was hard to shut the woman up. She was like a cuckoo clock that you couldn't switch off, try as you might. I do not know of a single Friday night dinner that Gertie had enjoyed in our home where she didn't cause some level of offence. She always bluntly remarked on my mother's cooking, which she always seemed to find fault with, and in a way I believe she enjoyed being tactlessly impolite at any given opportunity. "Oh, these potatoes, dear, are very overdone, if you don't mind my saying so," she would say, offering her own salient advice. "You need to watch them, dear. When they're in the oven and when you're roasting them, it's far more superior to always use goose fat, I find. My mother always used goose fat all the time she roasted potatoes, and it makes a world of difference to the flavour, let me tell you. I can taste the olive oil on these potatoes, dear. Far too pungent for my liking, I have to say. Another thing I'd like to point out is you don't get your potatoes fluffy enough. One of the best secrets is to go for a potato that is good for roasting, that is both waxy and starchy. You can't get better than the Yukon Gold, I find. They are the absolute best potatoes for roasting purposes." My mother would respond by saying, "Thanks for the advice, Gertie. I will bear it in mind in future." Other times Gertie might say, "You've got way too much garlic in the casserole, dear. It dominates all the subtle flavours in your dish. You must be very careful when adding garlic to a dish. I, for one, don't want to smell like the metro in Paris, where you can barely breathe because the stench of garlic is so overpowering. People there are practically sweating the stuff out of their pores in the subway, let me tell you. It is utterly revolting. And the French consider themselves the best cooks in the world. If they've got to put so much garlic into every dish, then I seriously doubt they're that good at cooking after all." It was interesting how Gertie was quick to deride my mother's meals at any given opportunity. But I noticed she was always heartily cleaning her plate, so nothing remained on it. If my mother's meals were as substandard as she steadfastly claimed, it was rather surprising she never left anything behind on her plate, which she'd have probably licked clean if no one had been watching her. Another example of Gertie's abrupt rudeness was when she told my mother to her face that she had put on a substantial amount of weight. "Why, I do believe you're getting a little tubby, dear, around the middle. And at your age, middle-aged spread is not very attractive and very hard to lose. My advice is you need to start counting calories as soon as possible. You don't want to end up like me, my dear, with an impaired metabolism like I happen to have. I have a good friend who weighs everything out that she eats. You would be wise to follow in her example. She's had a great deal of success in losing weight around her middle." It was really weird that Gertie would go on about my mother's weight, given she herself was as wide as a barrel, was rather rotund, like an oversized pork sausage that was bursting at the seams. She regularly wore flowery dresses to flatter her figure, but I somehow think the dresses made her look even more enormous. My mother should have turned around and said, "You're a fine one to talk, Gertie. Why, you must weigh half a ton." But my mother was far too polite, too diplomatic and well-mannered to ever insult Gertie, even though Gertie wasn't afraid to be as blunt as possible when it came to my mother. Another thing Gertie had a big go at my mother about was her hairstyle, telling her rather abruptly that it didn't suit her at all. "Why, you do look like a boy, my dear," she told my mother. "Why do you cut your hair so desperately short? It's most unflattering and very unfeminine on a woman. I've never understood the fixation of short hair myself. And as for all those dreadful highlights, what's wrong with your original colour? It looks as if you've been painting streaks on your hair. It's most unbecoming. Why on earth is the streaky look so in fashion? God only knows. Hair should always be one standard colour." My mother was used to Bertie's unbridled directness, but I never appreciated how uncouth the woman actually was, and the very fact that she had never liked my dog Lassie, and thought all dogs should be kept outdoors, made me dislike her all the more. I will say even Lassie, who liked practically all human beings on the face of the earth, wisely kept a wary distance from Gertie, who had kicked my dog 2 or 3 times with an expression of revulsion on her face. "Get that dreadful dog away from me, Jack, dear," she would pipe, as if she was swatting away a filthy fly. Every time Gertie visited, Lassie would keep her distance from the woman, almost as if she knew that Gertie did not like her. If we sat together in the living room as a family, Lassie would lie in front of my feet very protectively, almost as if she was protecting me from the woman, and on several occasions I had heard her emit a very low growl at Gertie, that she had never done before to another human soul. On one occasion, when Gertie was sitting alone in the living room, fumbling through a magazine, I suddenly heard the most terrifying, bone-chilling scream, the likes of such I'd never heard before. It was coming from the living room, and I knew it was Gertie. I really thought in that second that she'd been attacked by an intruder who had unwittingly broken into our home. I dashed into the living room, holding a baseball bat up in the air as a defensive weapon, to attack the intruder, but I didn't find an intruder with Gertie. I realized the woman had thrown a wobbly, because she had inadvertently sat on Lassie's dog blanket that I'd accidentally failed to remove from the couch, and Gertie's green skirt had got covered in a plethora of blonde hairs. But the way she was going on about it, you'd have thought the woman needed rescuing from a burning building, as her life was in perilous jeopardy or something. "What's the matter, Gertie? You gave me such a shock. I was so scared. I thought a burglar had broken into our house and attacked you. What's happened? Are you all right?" "All right? Do I look all right, Jack? I think not," said Gertie, her round face growing white with indignation, and her many turkey-like chins wobbled furiously beneath her fleshy face. Her bug eyes glared at me furiously from behind a pair of jewelled-looking glasses covered in a plethora of diamante, as Gertie, like a magpie, was fixated by anything that sparkled. She'd often carry purses covered in rhinestones around with her, or wear them on her feet in the form of sandals or shoes, and she always wore jewellery covered in diamante. "Look at me, Jack! I'm covered in your dog's hairs," she said accusingly, trying to shake off a few of Lassie's dog hairs off her woolly green skirt. "Look at the state of my skirt! It's absolutely ruined thanks to that wretched dog of yours. How many times do I have to tell people like yourselves that having dogs around the house is most unclean and unsanitary? You should get rid of the nasty thing. He's like a big oversized blonde rat that needs exterminating as far as I'm concerned." "You sat on Lassie's blanket," I explained apologetically. "I'm sorry. I should have removed it before you came to our house for dinner. I only put it on the couch to stop the dog's hairs getting onto the furniture. But it's only dog hair, Gertie. And it's on your skirt. It'll come off easily. I'll get you a clothes brush if you like. It's not a big deal. Your skirt is definitely not ruined. I promise you that." "I disagree with you, Jack. My skirt is definitely ruined after the dog's hairs have got all over it. Honestly, that dog of yours is such a nuisance," she piped insolently. "Why you let it into your house, God only knows. And leaving flea-ridden blankets lying on your settee for your guests to sit on is nothing short of offensive and insulting. You should never have got that dreadful dog in the first place. But your constant badgering of your father for the dog finally made the poor man buckle under the pressure. You wouldn't stop going on and on about it, would you? You wanted a golden retriever, and nobody could say no to you, could they, Jack? Because you're spoilt rotten. So what did your father do? He brought you one. Your house has been soiled and contaminated by that dog's presence. I imagine even her filthy hairs are stuck in the carpets and on the furniture. And there are probably fleas laying their eggs everywhere. It's so filthy having a domestic pet on the premises. I don't know why your father ever got you that dog. More's the pity as far as I'm concerned." "Lassie doesn't have fleas, Gertie," I said, leaping to her defence. "I wash her regularly. She's as clean as a whistle. She sometimes moults in summer because it's hot." "You're being unkind, Gertie. Lassie is a member of our family, and we love her very much. You're talking about her as if she's a dirty rat." "You're telling me I'm being unkind, are you, Jack? Do you have any idea how ludicrously expensive the skirt of mine was? I need to be careful what I wear when I come here on a Friday evening, because it seems no place is safe for me to sit. with that bag of fleas always lying around, soiling everything in her wake with her long blonde hair." At that point my mother had come into the living room to see what the fuss was about, because she could hear Gertie's raised voice. She instinctively leapt to Gertie's defence before I got the chance to say something rude back to my so-called substitute grandmother, as anyone who wants to offend my dog, well then I'm quite happy to deride them myself. But my mother never gave me a chance to intercede or to stand up for Lassie. Instead, she profusely apologised for the state of Gertie's skirt, ordering me to get my father's clothes brush at once. To say that I was not fond of Gertie was an understatement, and I could never comprehend why my mother was so insistent on inviting the brash woman to dinner every single Friday night. I think my father shared my clandestine opinions about the woman, but he wisely kept such thoughts to himself to avoid getting into an argument with my mother that he knew he would never ever win. I sighed at the dreadful thought of having Gertie for dinner again on Friday, as Friday had rolled around yet again, and for 5 hours I undoubtedly would have to put up with that insufferable, very hostile woman all over again, hurling insults at Lassie left, right and centre, like a flurry of darts being flung indiscriminately at a dartboard. No doubt Gertie would be telling us how awful my dog was, and how I should drop her off at the nearest shelter. I couldn't understand why she failed to appreciate how beautiful Lassie was, as everybody else so obviously did. Indeed, when people visited our home, all they could do was marvel at the gentle manner of my dog, and how physically beautiful she was, with her long flowing blonde hair. But Gertie could see nothing good in Lassie at all. As I was about to leave the house with Lassie at my side, my mother was still going on at me like a nagging fishwife about how she'd like me to help her prepare vegetables for the evening meal that Gertie would soon be attending. I sheepishly said to my mother, "Why can't Angie help you peel the potatoes and set the table tonight? I'm always the one that does the chores around here. You never ever ask Angie to help you out. Why do you always pick on me to do all the chores? When did Angie ever help with anything?" Angie was my 12-year-old sister, who always seemed to get away with doing nothing for as long as possible. Well, as long as I'd known her to be my sister, that is. I suspect it had something to do with being the youngest, and in my experience the younger sibling can get away with blue murder. Even my best friend Colin, who lived a couple of doors down from me, in a similar-looking house to ours, was in exactly the same position as I was, as his younger sister got away with even more than Angie actually did. So suppose I could have had a worse deal. But I did think my situation was rather piteous, to say the very least. It just wasn't fair that I always ended up doing the lion's share of all the household chores, or getting into trouble if something went wrong. It would seem, as the oldest kid in my family, I was always the one at fault. One time Angie had scraped her brand new bicycle while out cycling in the neighbourhood with me. On this occasion she'd lost her balance, and her bicycle went skidding across the tarmac. My sister was subsequently ejected off her bicycle. Luckily she was unharmed, and the street was very quiet at the time. She only received a graze on her knee, but her brand new bicycle took a beating, with some of the glossy paintwork being badly scratched off its surfaces. Somehow the damage to her bicycle ended up being all my fault. My mother blamed me, proclaiming I should have been watching out for my sister more carefully. I would be told, "You know, Jack, that your sister Angie is ungainly and cack-handed on that bicycle of hers. You should have been paying closer attention to her, so she didn't fall off the bike. You need to look out for your sister, Jack. Not everyone is as nimble and coordinated as you so obviously are. You must remember Angie is still learning to use her brand new bicycle. And as her brother, I expect you to watch out for her." So yes, you could say my annoying sister Angie got away with everything. And much as I loved her, there were times I felt frustrated that in my parents' very biased eyes, my mother most especially, Angie could invariably do no wrong, as if she was the one born with a silver spoon in her mouth, which I rather suspect she was. On this unassuming Friday afternoon, Angie was sitting at the breakfast nook in the kitchen doing her homework. She had a glass of Coca-Cola on one side of her, and a small plate containing a couple of chocolate chip cookies that she hadn't touched yet. We always liked to finish our homework on a Friday, so that we could enjoy the weekend together as a family, without thinking about assignments that were required to be handed in first thing on a Monday morning by our ever-so-demanding teachers, that seemed to take great delight in piling on homework for us to do on the weekends. As you can imagine, all this homework would invariably frustrate me, as the teachers at our school for some reason never seemed to believe we deserved a break from being lumbered with yet more work. I always did my homework upstairs in my bedroom, against a background of jazz music, which my mother tirelessly complained about, saying it disrupted the peaceful tranquillity in our home. But I liked listening to it. It helped me focus, and I think that Lassie liked it too, as she'd always drift off into a peaceful slumber, lying against my legs, as I dutifully attended to my homework. My mother always diligently supervised Angie's homework. She knew that Angie could get so easily distracted and completely lose focus, and then her homework would never ever get done. So my mother had taken it upon herself to keep a vigilant watch over Angie until her homework was finally complete, rather like a hawk overseeing a meaty carcass. When Angie first started doing her homework in her own bedroom upstairs, my mother would find her listening to the radio, reading one of her many novels, and losing all track of time. After that my mother put her foot down and decided Angie needed to be supervised at all times, or her grades would go into a rapid decline. My mother always believed that it was important to supervise your children, and if they failed in their grades, it was almost the parents' responsibility, because they played a part in that failure. Angie was scribbling furiously in her exercise book, chewing the end of her pen. I had sneakily suspected that she had long since completed her homework, but was trying to look as if she was still busily engaged in trying to figure out a very difficult math equation. Let's not kid, for my sister Angie, the nauseating, unappealing idea of doing any chores around and about the house was something that filled her with the utmost of dread. She was intrinsically lazy by nature, and much preferred the easier life. Over the years she had become cunningly masterful at pulling the wool over my mother's eyes, so invariably she got exactly what she wanted from her. Angie looked up at me from her exercise book. She took a sip of Coca-Cola from the long-stemmed glass filled with ice cubes that rattled as she lifted it to her mouth. I noticed she was wearing exactly the same exasperated frown as my mother had on her face, and it suddenly struck me like a lightning bolt how incredibly alike my mother she actually was. I had never really realized this before. I had seen photographs of my mother of a similar age to what Angie was now. In this private moment I reflected on those photographs of my mother at a similar age to Angie. If the truth be told, my sister looked like the carbon copy of my mother. They rarely were two birds of a feather. They looked so alike. Despite their age differences, both had similar olive complexions, identical brown chestnut-coloured hair, although in my mother's case her hair was heavily highlighted with auburn blonde and chocolate-coloured hues, but it was always kept meticulously short in a sophisticated avant-garde style, which Gertie so obviously professed to hate. And maybe for that quintessential reason alone, just to ruffle up Gertie's feathers, which my mother probably secretly enjoyed doing, she had rigorously stuck to the same hairstyle. Angie's hair was long and silky, almost always worn away from her face in a no-nonsense ponytail. Both my mother and sister had similar-coloured hazel eyes that were dappled with green flecks. Angie sat up erect on the seat. Her back became as straight as a pencil. She fiddled with the elastic band in her hair to realign her ponytail that had swung too far to the right. It was clear by her disapproving, somewhat defensive demeanour that she was not happy with me for suggesting that she should help my mother prepare the vegetables for the evening meal. "I can't help, Jack," she said, pulling a face that made her suddenly look like a really ugly gargoyle. I couldn't help but think. "I'm busy, can't you see? I've got all this math homework to figure out. I'm swamped by all this homework of mine that Mrs. Cloyson gave me. The woman is such a slave driver, let me tell you. You have no idea what she's like. I'll be lucky if I get through it all." My sister let out a heavily exaggerated poor me kind of sigh that didn't fool me for a single second. She brazenly continued, "Knowing my luck, there'll still be homework left to do. Tomorrow morning," she said with a sorrowful tone to her voice, as if she was one of those people that had life incredibly hard. My sister's big act did not deceive me for a single second. She was a natural-born actress, and I could smell her deceit on her as fragrantly as a cadaver dog can smell a dead corpse. To affirm my suspicions, I could see a mischievous, rather smug glimmer in my sister's eyes, and I knew at once she was lying through her teeth about all the homework she needed to complete. But my mother fell for her artful shenanigans hook, line and sinker like she did every single time, and it naturally drove me stark raving mad. But somehow I managed to hold my tongue, as rubbing my mother up the wrong way would do me no favours. She would always take my sister's side, in any dispute it would seem. My mother frowned at me. "You heard your sister, Jack. Can you not see she's terribly busy with her homework at the moment? She hasn't got time to help me prepare the vegetables for dinner. I was relying on your help, Jack. But I guess Lassie needs a walk more than I need you to peel the potatoes for supper. Given you failed to walk her earlier on in the morning, be quick about it, will you? I don't want this happening again. When you return home from school, that is when you're expected to walk Lassie, Jack. Not at this late hour of the afternoon, under the pretence you had so much homework to complete. I'm inclined to think that it wasn't the essay that was keeping you. You probably knew Gertie was coming to dinner tonight, as she does every Friday, and I suspect you wanted to escape the inevitable chores like peeling the potatoes. I wouldn't put anything past you, Jack," said my mother, waving a formidable finger at me. "Just so you know, I'll keep the chores for you when you get back. You'll be doing the potatoes when you return from your walk. You're not getting away with it." "I promise you, Mum, next time I'll walk Lassie directly after school and leave my homework for later. And don't worry, I'll do the vegetables for you when I get back." "Good, I'm glad to hear it, Jack." I pulled a face at my sister, as if to tell her I knew the game she was pulling, and she stuck her tongue out at me. Honestly, that sister of mine could be so desperately annoying, and there were times I rued the day that she actually was my sister, and this was clearly one of those times. I was heartily relieved to finally get out of our house and away from my mother's oppressive nagging and my sister Angie's relentless duplicitous games that ensured she would remain permanently lazy, probably spending the rest of her slovenly God-given days duping my naively ignorant mother so as to avoid lifting a finger around the house. So invariably any tasks my mother needed doing would ultimately be given to me. That was the sad story of my life. But outside of the house I could forget about all that, for I had bigger fish I wanted to fry this afternoon, and the thought of what I needed to do lifted my spirits exponentially. If my mother had a bird's-eye view of my thoughts right now, she would have a hissy fit, that was for sure. But what she didn't know would never ever hurt her. I think Lassie was extremely pleased to be out of doors as much as I was, in the fragrant fresh air, where the traces of petrichor after the rain could be easily smelt in the air, and away from that burst of indignant tension that had been exhibited by my cantankerous mother. Having said that, what dog does not appreciate a jolly good walk? Lassie was no exception to that rule. By all accounts, you only had to say the word walkie to Lassie. She'd know exactly what you were saying. She'd ebulliently charge to the door with an unbridled enthusiasm, her blonde tail wagging furiously. Sadly, on many occasions that lethal tail of hers had done serious damage around and about our home. Another fact that Gertie would always be quick to point out. For a start, my mother's favourite glass coffee table had been ruthlessly shattered by Lassie's tail, which had left my mother less than amused. And then on another occasion a couple of my mother's decorative expensive vessels, made out of the finest porcelain china, that were on artful display on the coffee table, had been vandalized and rambunctiously flung across the living room with the brute force of Lassie's dexterous tail, only to break up into hundreds of pieces. Needless to say, the cost of those damages had all but come out of my pocket money. As I was casually sashaying down the street with Lassie at my side, I was charged with a feeling of great enthusiasm. I couldn't wipe the big grin off my face. I was hoping my plan for the day would work, and I was almost certain that it would. I was pretty sure that Jetski would be at the doggy park at this time of the afternoon, escorted by his devoted owner, Mr. Lehman, on his leash, and I knew that Jetski would take one sniff of Lassie and would be all over my dog like a hot rash. I was certain of it. I knew without any doubt that Mr. Lehman, much like myself, would be equally as thrilled as I was to see his dog inseminating Lassie, who I was certain had come into season. It would just mean I'd have to keep all the other male dogs away from Lassie at the park, but I was pretty sure most of them had been neutered by their owners, so even if they were to mount Lassie, they'd not be able to sire any of her puppies, which was a huge relief. It was a blissfully radiant afternoon in July, when ultimately the sunset would only occur at about 8:30 in the evening, so there was still plenty of sunshine left on this day in our tranquil green leafy neighbourhood of Chestnut Hill in Philadelphia, where our house was among many in a series of row houses along the street, all that looked remarkably alike. So people had done everything in their power to make their own houses look uniquely different from their neighbours', as everybody naturally embraces their own kind of individuality and likes to put their own special mark on their home. Some people had changed the colour of their front door, or put plant boxes in the front windows that had been placed strategically in a showy position so that a tumble of showering red geraniums could add a splash of colour or curb appeal to their homes. Our house proudly distinguished itself from many in our street. It boasted a bright red front door, which looked opulently smart in its deportment, and everybody said as much. My mother had chosen to paint our door a glossy red colour, as she had got hold of a book on Chinese feng shui, whatever you choose to call it. I can never actually pronounce these Chinese names terribly well, nor do I know much about some of their unorthodox practices, but my mother swears by them and believes these nonsensical rituals are actually true and should be taken very seriously, as the beliefs go back for thousands of years. I fiercely believe that if feng shui advised a person to wear a pink sweater every day of your life, that's exactly what my mother would do, as that was how devout she was in regards to some of these practices. According to my mother, the Chinese believe the energy in the layout of rooms affects the positive flow of things in your life, and if things are positioned incorrectly, it can cause energy blockages that can bring about problems and even disease in your life. Under no circumstances, for example, are you allowed to leave your loo seat up, or your prosperity will be flushed down the toilet. If me or my father committed a dreadful offence such as this, which we had both been guilty of doing from time to time, my mother would be on at us like a fisherwife from Billingsgate Fish Market. Her voice would go up several decibels and turn into an indignant squawk, and we would be subject to a long lecture about how much money we would lose that month because we had carelessly left the loo seat up. So my dad and I quickly learnt there were some offences not worth our while committing, and this was clearly one of them. "Love," my father would say, rather diplomatically, raising one of his sceptical bushy eyebrows, "aren't you taking all this feng shui stuff a little too seriously? You've rearranged all our furniture. It's all over the place. I barely recognise our home anymore. And you get grievously upset if everything is not located in a perfect position. Isn't all this a little over the top, perhaps?" "Pete, for goodness sake," my mother would say, looking affronted, "I would appreciate it if you didn't lecture me on something you know absolutely nothing about. I've been studying feng shui, you know, and the Chinese have been doing this energy work for thousands of years. They're very particular about every building that is erected in mainland China and in Hong Kong, as it happens. They need to ensure it faces the right direction and that the energy flow is positive. So they know exactly what they're doing, because they're desirous to attract good fortune and prosperity into their lives. And I, for one, want to adopt these same principles in our own home, for the benefit of us all." My father knew when to shut down his arguments, as he was determined to keep the peace, so winning an argument with my mother, unless you were Gertie, was close to impossible. So my father let my mother obsess over this feng shui nonsense of hers, as much as she liked. So he became, like me and my sister, a silent observer, so to speak, secretly mocking some of these absurd practices. It was only Gertie who got away with telling my mother how ridiculous it all was. "Honestly," she said to my mother, "I cannot believe you've changed your furniture, moved it around the place like this. I liked everything the way you had it before. This is nonsensical. And you've done this because of some Chinese belief. It's very strange. If the Chinese got everything right, you know, they'd be running the world by now." "They almost are, Gertie," my mother had said in response. "Look at the success they've had in the world. They're the one superpower that has contributed exponentially to the global economy. And if we're not careful, one day in the future, they might actually run the show. "Well, I certainly hope that will never happen," said Bertie, waving her hand in disgust at the very idea. My mother continued to follow the feng shui practices to the letter, with a biblical enthusiasm. She had learnt that red was an auspicious colour, that not only to wear it in your workplace, but also to introduce it into your home. It would seem painting your front door red attracted prosperity into your life, along with introducing red into your home in the form of scatter cushions or throws, was also a way of bringing in favour. Alas, I don't think our financial fortunes changed dramatically after our door was painted postbox red. But I liked the colour, so I wasn't complaining. I've always been pretty partial to red. I like vibrant colours, and even Lassie wore a red collar on my mother's insistence, as red was so very lucky. My father thought my mother painting our front door bright, flamboyant red was going a step too far, but he boringly always preferred more muted, nondescript tones of colour anyway. I actually thought our front door was the most splendid door among all the row houses, and many people complimented us on how good it actually looked, and honestly, it really did look terrific. We were incredibly blessed to have so many accessible parks in the local area, and whenever I took Lassie to the doggy park, I believe Lassie had a taste of doggy heaven. She was introduced to all species of dogs, from sausage dogs to Great Danes, and the varieties seemed as endless as the flavours of ice cream you get at a local ice cream parlour. Often when I went to the doggy park, I was introduced to yet another rare breed. You name it, the park boasted a hive of every kind of dog imaginable to man. And for Lassie, being social with other dogs was a wild, very exciting adventure for her. She was well socialised and got on well with every dog that had a wagging tail. My mother was of course right about jet ski, and my ulterior motives for going to the doggy park that afternoon, even though she probably didn't actually know it. I knew that the stunningly handsome Labradoodle would be a very agreeable father to Lassie's pups, and both Lassie and Jetski had the most awesome temperaments that I hoped would be inherited by Lassie's offspring. If Jetski mounted her at the park a few times, I was pretty certain Lassie would be impregnated with his highly sought-after sperm. Once she was on her way to having half a dozen puppies, my mother wouldn't be able to do a damn thing to stop it. She'd probably notice Lassie getting fatter and would blame me for feeding her too many titbits under the table. And then one day Lassie would behave strangely as she looked for a nesting place in our home. And then voila, one by one the puppies would pop out of her like sausages in a processing unit. I'd pretend that I'd absolutely no idea how Lassie had got pregnant. I would plead complete ignorance on the matter. I knew the puppies would be so adorable that they'd go like hotcakes to owners clamouring to get their hands on one of these delightful pups, but I'd make absolutely certain they went to great homes. I knew my dog Lassie would make a fabulous mother. She really did deserve to enjoy the joys of motherhood. I also knew underneath the layers of my mother's so-called tough veneer, she really was a pussycat. I suspected once the puppies had been born, much like my mother had behaved when Lassie came into our lives, she'd be smitten by the puppies. She'd be oohing and ahhing about how wonderful they were. On this unassuming, beautiful day, I had no idea that in a few moments my world would be completely shattered, and that I would always regret taking Lassie for a walk in the late afternoon. The sky was a cornflower blue colour, without a single fluffy white cloud in sight, even though it had rained a lot during the morning. All the trees that lined our pavement rather grandly were like an army battalion of tall, lofty, distinguished-looking soldiers that were ablaze with shiny green leaves, while lawns and people's closely packed front yards were green and manicured. I hasten to say that many people living in the Chestnut Hill area here in Philly seemed to be unfathomably blessed with green fingers, as some of their yards were enviably as close to perfect as you can possibly get, and certainly deserved a front cover spread in a glossy magazine. My mother, on the other hand, was sadly not one of those fortunate people that happened to be blessed with nimble green fingers that could turn a yard into a work of art, although, believe me, she tried on numerous occasions to turn our front yard into the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, but with very little success, despite her very best efforts. It would seem, for some unexplained reason, any of my mother's seedlings she planted would always die on her, so our front yard boasted the most hardy of perennials that were resistant to dying, so even my mother could not cause them undue damage. As I steadily walked down the street, I whistled a happy tune to myself, while Lassie trotted at my side. As usual, her curious, very interested nose was devotedly pinned to the ground, as she tried to tune into the secret, mysterious world I know nothing about, laced with all kinds of scent signatures that only a savvy dog can understand. I've often fancied becoming a dog for a second, and experiencing the world through a dog's nose. I dare say it would be a fascinating experience, although I do believe that some things dogs put their noses into, I personally would rather not smell, but I won't go into that now. Old Mrs. Trellis from number 38 was in her yard. She was wearing a huge oversized straw hat, with the largest rim that covered her face that I'd ever seen. She was dutifully attending to some roses with a bottle of spray in her hand. It had rained earlier in the morning, and I suspected she was spraying the roses again to protect them from being decimated by the ever-increasing beetle population that descended on the plants at night, usually during the witching hours, with a vengeance. Mrs. Trellis complained bitterly that the rose beetles in her yard were aggressively destroying all the green leafy foliage on her roses. One night she had stood vigil over them, snapping up as many beetles as she could, and locking them up in a glass jar, where she disposed of them all with a simple flush of the toilet, and she had felt a great sense of triumph over having killed so many of the little buggers. On one occasion she informed me that she had caught over 86 beetles in one night. I think Mrs. Trellis was in her 80s, although I wasn't entirely sure about that, because my mother always told me it was extremely rude to ask people their ages. I think the real giveaway for me, to her advancing age, was that her posture was slightly stooped. Her skin was crepey and covered in a road map of fine lines and wrinkles, and her hard-working hands were covered in brown spots, caused from sun damage. But despite everything, even at 14 years old, I thought old Mrs. Trellis was in remarkably good shape for her age. She seemed oblivious to the hot sun that was beating down on her back unabashedly. I will admit there was quite a blinding glare on this beautiful afternoon. The sun reflected light off the people's car bonnets, those that were parked in the street, that is. Mrs. Trellis looked up at me from beneath the brim of her large hat, where a couple of artificial roses and a pretty scarf had been carefully pinned. She looked at me through crinkled, pale blue eyes that sparkled with humour. I could see she was very pleased to see me. She was humming away happily to herself when she looked up at me and said, "Going for a walk, are we, Jack? It's a bit late in the day for you, isn't it, dear? I normally see you walking Lassie earlier on in the day, when you come back from school, so this is a tad unusual for you. I never see you or Angie around at this time of the day, although I dare say Lassie will welcome a walk any time." "You're right," I said. "A walk is a walk for Lassie. But you're right, Mrs. Trellis. I don't normally walk Lassie at this time. This is the exception to the rule, I'm afraid." "Well, I thought as much," she said. "So why today of all days, Jack?" she asked me, looking curious. "Well, I had so much homework to do," I confessed. "I decided to do my work first to get it over and done with, but it took so much longer than I'd anticipated. I think it was an essay I had to write about a picnic that gobbled up all my time. I'm not creative, you see, and I'm useless at writing imaginary stories. Let's just say Mum's not best pleased with me. She said I should have taken Lassie for a walk first thing when I returned home from school. I usually do, and then I do my homework later on. But it's not always that plain sailing." I knew, of course, I was not entirely telling Mrs. Trellis the truth, but I was hardly going to broadcast to all and sundry that I was fully intending on getting Lassie impregnated at the doggy park by what I hoped would be an enthusiastic, over-amorous jet ski. Some secrets are best just not shared. "Oh, you poor thing," said Mrs. Trellis sympathetically. "What is wrong with teachers these days? Unscrupulously giving their students a ton of homework to do. Over the weekend, of all things. Back in my day, teachers were never like that, you know. I think we had it a whole lot easier than you kids today. But then we finished our studies at school, returning home with barely any homework at all. The way I see it is that these teachers, or ambassadors of education, so to speak, if you can call them that, should be absolutely ashamed of themselves. Don't you do enough work during the school week as it is, only to be burdened with yet more work when you return home? It makes no sense to me." A good teacher doesn't need to send the kids home with more work. You get enough of it during the week, surely." "That's exactly what I think," I told Mrs. Trellis. "We work hard at school, and then we have to work hard when we come home. These teachers, they never ever give us a break. But on the plus side, Miss Trellis, at least they're making more work for themselves, because they have all that marking to do, and I'm glad of that." "Never mind, dear. I suppose these teachers think they know what they're doing, but I beg to differ on that. Some of the greatest lessons in life that shape our characters are the lessons that happen outside the classroom. My father used to tell me that, you know, when I was a girl growing up. He said all the things that had made him successful in life were never lessons he learned from a teacher at a school, but lessons he learned from the real world. And it's absolutely true in every sense of the word. Even when I look back at my own school days, what did I really learn back then? I suppose I learned how to apply myself to studies, to read and write, that sort of thing. But what I learnt in the real world, some of those lessons were not easy, let me tell you. But it was a whole different thing altogether." "Well, I'm only 14 years old, Mrs. Trellis, and I don't have much life experience, so to speak, but I would say your father is onto something there. It kind of makes sense to me. I often think lots of stuff I learn at school is pretty useless and will never benefit me later on in life. In fact, I positively know it won't. They should teach us stuff that will help us to succeed in the real world, like your father would say."
"Well, you're not wrong about that, son," Mrs. Trellis agreed. I noticed she had a far-away, wistful look in her eyes. "Oh, I miss my father dreadfully," she said suddenly, a tear spilling down her cheeks. "Goodness gracious me, look at that, a tear," she said, wiping it away. "Where on earth did that come from?"
"Maybe it's 'cause you're sad, Mrs. Trellis. Maybe it's because you're thinking about your dad, and when you think about him, you get all sad. I guess if my dad wasn't around anymore, I'd cry an awful lot."
"Well, it never gets easier, you know, Jack. Losing a father, I mean. One day you will know exactly what I'm talking about. My father was a great man, you know. He died over 40 long years ago, would you believe it? And yet a day does not go by when I don't miss him desperately much. He left such an indelible mark on my life, you know." She pointed at the roses and chuckled. "I hasten to say, would you believe it, he was more passionate about roses than I actually am. He'd be absolutely devastated if he had insight into how many of these dreadful rose beetles I've had of late. These things know how to decimate all my bushes and make a mockery of the leaves. It never gets any easier, let me tell you. My father always used to say that looking after roses was a labour of love. He wasn't wrong about that."
"Well, Miss Trellis, your roses are the most beautiful in our entire street," I admitted.
"Less about me, dear," said Mrs. Trellis. "You must forgive me, Jack. I do know how to go on and on. My father always used to tell me I talk far too much for my own good. I'm much like my late mother in that regard, I have to say. When I was growing up, she wasn't known as the town gossip for nothing, let me tell you. My mother knew everything that was going on in our small town when I was a girl. And what she didn't know wasn't worth knowing."
"I don't think you're a gossip, Mrs. Trellis. You enjoy talking. There's nothing wrong with that."
"Well, that's very nice of you to say, Jack. But don't let me keep you. You have a walk you need to be on. How is Lassie doing, by the way?" she asked, looking at Lassie, who was wagging her tail furiously and was currently lifting her leg on a tree trunk. "She certainly looks happy to be on this walk, I have to say."
"Well, she's always happy when we take her for a walk. Well, when I take her for a walk. But she's doing great, Mrs. Trellis. Thank you for asking. You know Lassie. She's always happy. We're on our way to the doggy park, if you must know."
"Well, she's a fine-looking dog, Jack, and credit to you for all your training skills, for she's very obedient these days. It's marvellous that you can walk her off the leash. Not everybody can boast about that, you know. Now, you enjoy your walk, will you? Oh, just so you know, Jack, I saw Mr. Lehman a moment ago. He was walking jet ski to the doggy park, down the street, of course. We had a few words together. Turns out he was in a jolly good mood. Apparently he won some money on the horses. I believe he's quite the betting man, is Mr. Lehman. Always been lucky with the horses. And as for that labradoodle of his, Jetski, well, like Lassie, he's a delightful dog to behold. But I'm sure you know that already."
"So you saw them going to the doggy park?" I said, my face suddenly lighting up like a Christmas tree. "That's good. Lassie really, really likes Jetski," I said, secretly feeling a sense of unbridled joy in my heart as I thought of a bright future with 8 adorable puppies. And a part of me wanted to gallop down the road as fast as I possibly could to get to the doggy park at record speed. But I willfully restrained myself from such a temptation and smiled warmly at Mrs. Trellis. "Lovely seeing you, Mrs. Trellis. Have a great afternoon," I said. "I might see you on my walk back home, if you're still attending to your roses, that is."
"Now don't let me keep you, dear. Off with you, young man," said Mrs. Trellis, waving her arm. "Enjoy your walk, will you?"
I waved at Mrs. Trellis, who watched me meander down the street, while she continued to spray her roses with her organic insecticide, that she told me once was a combination of garlic and canola oil, which apparently keeps the beetles at bay, as Mrs. Trellis refused to use anything on her plants that was not organic. It was as I was about to cross over to the park on the other side of the road, I suddenly observed a car rolling down the street. It was a red Hyundai, but it all happened very quickly. There was no time for me to study the license plates, and I would have done so had I known it would have been important. The car screeched and came to an abrupt and very sudden stop. The noise was so jarring, and deafening to a certain extent, that I almost jumped out of my skin. A man wearing a pair of khaki shorts and a red golfing top, along with a pair of open sandals that he was wearing with white socks, which my mother always said was a criminal offence. She claimed that men wearing socks with sandals just wasn't allowed as far as she was concerned. Well, the man jumped out of the car. He looked somewhat flustered. He was pointing to the wheel of his car and saying, "This can't be happening. Please, God, no." "Are you all right, sir?" I asked, stopping in my tracks, sensing the man seemed to be in some kind of trouble. I suspected he must have run a flat tire or something, which was why he appeared suddenly very flustered. Maybe he was in a rush to get to an appointment and would likely need to change a tire. My mother would say things like this invariably always happened when you were in a rush.
"Whether I'm all right or not, son, is very debatable," said the man. "I think I heard a pop in one of my rear wheels. I hope I'm wrong about this, but I believe I've run over a nail or something. The last thing I need is a flat. Do me a favour, son, won't you? Will you check my rear wheel on the passenger side to see if you can see a nail embedded in the rubber? I'll check the rear wheel on the driver's side. You'll be doing me a big favour."
"Sure, sir," I said, eager to be of help. I trotted over to the rear passenger side tire. I couldn't help but think that both wheels looked absolutely fine. But if the man had heard a pop, it needed investigating. But I thought it was strange that he wouldn't know which wheel it was that had been affected by this so-called nail. I told Lassie to stay on the pavement. "Stay, girl," I said in a stiff command. "I won't be a second, Lassie." Lassie was obediently sitting on the grass, while I trotted over to the rear wheel to examine it more carefully. As I was bending down to examine the rubber tire, I said, "I don't see anything here, sir." And the next thing I knew, the man had picked up Lassie, thrown him into the back of the car, and driven off with my dog. It happened so very quickly, I don't even think Lassie had time to react. It was such a surreal moment, I was so bemused, so taken aback, that I stared off into the distance, wondering if that had really just happened. This man had abducted my beloved dog, who was my very best friend. Was this even actually happening? Or was this a terrible dream on which I would wake up in any moment? But I realized it had happened, and it was real. I was left feeling completely confounded and absolutely devastated, with a loose lead in my hand, staring ahead of me disbelievingly. As far as I was concerned, Chestnut Hill was a safe suburb in which to live here in Philadelphia, but someone had just had the audacity to steal my beloved dog. Suddenly I wanted to get violently sick, as I was struck with a horrifying realization that I would likely never see Lassie again, and that hit me so brutally hard, like a slab of cement being flung at my head. My worst nightmare had been realized. Lassie had been given to me as a birthday present, 2 years earlier, on my 12th birthday to be precise. I'd been begging both of my parents for a golden retriever since I was all but 6 years old, for I'd fallen hopelessly in love with our neighbour's golden retriever called Gunner, who had the most affectionate disposition I'd ever seen in a dog before, and would cover my face with all kinds of sloppy kisses. From that point on, I knew that I knew, unlike anything else I've known as assertively in my life before, that I just had to have a golden retriever, as in my impressionable young opinion, no other breed would do. Every year my parents would ask what it was that I wanted for Christmas, or for a birthday that was hiding its head around the very next corner, and my answer unequivocally was always the same. I resolutely wanted a dog that looked exactly the same as Gunner, a golden retriever, of course. I think my parents thought I'd grow out of my obsessive fixation on golden retrievers, and would later in my young life be asking for other gifts that boys my age would likely be requesting, but they were proved wrong in all their assumptions. It would seem as each year went by, my wishes remained resolutely the same. I wanted a female golden retriever that I was going to call Lassie after the movie I revered so much. I would look at my parents with wide pleading eyes and beg them with all my heart to buy me a golden retriever. My mother's answer was always the same.
"We'll see about it, Jack,"
she would say. My heart would drop like a stone being flung into a lake, for in my mother's vocabulary, "we will see" only meant one thing, and that was it wasn't going to happen. But did I stop pleading? Absolutely not. My teacher, Mrs. Wingchair at school, told us all the time that if we wanted something badly enough, to never ever give up. I had followed her salient advice to the letter, closing my eyes as I prayed every single night before I went to bed, and I asked God for a golden retriever. My parents argued among themselves about my desire to own a golden retriever. My mother was dead set against my getting a golden retriever. It didn't help that my mother's sister Gertie was dead set against the idea, and could sometimes be a powerful influencer and shaker in my mother's life, I regret to say.
"Goodness gracious, dear,"
she would say to my mother.
"You don't want a dog like that. Goodness gracious, I couldn't think of anything worse. Imagine how filthy your house will become. Besides, your house is so dreadfully small. You hardly have enough space in here to swing a cat. Do you really want your house smelling like a dirty dog blanket?"
My mother told me she didn't mind us getting a small dog, perhaps, but golden retrievers were large.
"They take up a lot of space, Jack," she would say. "Besides, Gertie's absolutely right. I would hardly describe our yard, or our house for that matter, as large enough to accommodate a large dog. Besides anything else, they always require regular walking, don't they? They're expensive to feed."
And the list of negatives went on and on. I knew, of course, that Gertie's negative propaganda, which was rather like fake news, was masterfully all behind my mother's apparent disapproval of acquiring a golden retriever. And it seems Gertie's negative influences ran deep. I think my mother thought she had persuaded my father that getting a large dog was absolutely out of the question, but my father had other ideas on his mind. I think there was a large part of him that wanted to give the finger up to my mother's sister Gertie, who my father secretly could not stand. My father even confessed that he'd also been very taken by the neighbour's dog Gunner, and had been rather partial to the idea of our family getting a golden retriever, as he believed every kid should grow up with animals in their home. But my mother had never taken his seemingly idle comments all that seriously. My father artfully changed the dynamics of things around our house, when against my mother's wishes on my 12th birthday, he came home from work with a big box in his hands, accompanied by a huge mischievous grin on his face that he couldn't seem to wipe away. I guessed my mother sensed by my father's rather peculiar expression on his face that he was up to something, for she raised a brow and looked at him rather quizzically. I, on the other hand, was blindly immune to what was going on around me. I was so caught up in the bubble of my own personal melancholia that I could not shake off. It had been another dreadfully disappointing birthday for me, with my wish for a golden retriever still not fully realized. I was left with the grim, soul-destroying realization that I was likely never going to acquire the dog of my dreams. I knew my mother's dogged determination not to have a large dog around the house, due to Gertie's artful persuasions, was the quintessential reason why my dreams would probably never come true. I secretly resented my mother bitterly for this, and it didn't help that Gertie kept going on and on about how filthy dogs were, and getting me one was a very bad idea. She had certainly filled my mother's head with all kinds of alarming reasons why one should never own a dog under any circumstances. I assumed the big cardboard box my father had placed on the counter contained the ice cream cake my parents always ordered for my birthday, with regularity. This year I had chosen a golden retriever ice cream cake, taken from a picture of Gunner, which my mother had dutifully ordered, persuading the people to try and make the cake look like the dog. "I got your ice cream cake, son," said my father with a big sparkling twinkle in his eye. "I have to say they did a fine job on making the cake for you. It does remind me of Gunner. It's extraordinarily similar to the photograph you gave us, son. You're really going to approve of this one." My father's humour did not impress me at all. How could a cake ever compare with the real deal? My parents had not got me a golden retriever for my birthday, and I'm sorry, but a lousy cake that looked like a golden retriever would never substitute for the real thing. I had so longed in all my heart to have a golden retriever, and now I had reached breaking point, as such was the bitterness of my disappointment. "Go on, son. Aren't you going to take a look at your cake?" my father encouraged me. I reluctantly walked over to the box. Of course I liked ice cream as much as the next kid did, and I looked forward to ice cream cake every birthday. But for some reason I was feeling so deflated, so cheated, so discouraged, so bitterly disappointed, because I was certain that my father was going to get me a golden retriever for my 12th birthday, for he had hinted as much to me when my mother was out of the line of his hearing. But everything had fallen flat on my birthday, as after I'd opened all my presents that morning, I knew that I was not going to get a golden retriever. I reluctantly walked over to the box that was supposed to contain my ice cream cake, and I looked inside. I nearly fainted with shock, as inside the box was the most gorgeous little fluffy puppy, with big brown eyes and a pink ribbon on its collar. For a moment I thought I was dreaming. Could this even be real? I lovingly picked up the golden retriever puppy, holding her close to my chest. I could feel her little heart beating. She was so cuddly and smelt of parsley, that particular puppy breath that I love so much. I knew my life would never be the same again, for this little addition to our home had all but stolen my heart. I knew that in the 2 seconds that I held her in my arms, and that was the moment that was one of the happiest in my young life.
Dad! I don't know what to say. I can't believe it. You actually did it. You actually got me a golden retriever puppy. I don't know what to say, Dad. This is the most beautiful dog I've ever seen in my whole life. Dad, I don't know what to say. I've never had a more wonderful present. She's the best. I'm going to call her Lassie.
Well, I would hope you were going to call her Lassie. You've been saying so for long enough, son. I knew you would be rather partial to your cake this year, he teased.
What on earth have you done, darling?
My mother asked my father, as she watched me pull out the little blonde bundle of fluff. Even her stubbornly dog-resistant heart melted like butter when she laid eyes on Lassie for the first time. Indeed, she took over and cuddled the puppy to her chest, holding it close to her, and she was saying all kinds of things like,
"Oh, isn't she absolutely adorable? Oh, my word! Look at that cute little tail. It's wagging all the time. She's such a little happy thing, isn't she? What a delightful nature. Oh, and I do love her dark eyes. They're so soulful, are they not?"
I hasten to say, my mother was in love with Lassie. It couldn't have got better than that. And all her retorts about us getting a golden retriever just whittled away, for she was as smitten about the dog as I was.
"I thought we agreed we weren't going to get a large dog, and especially not a golden retriever,"
she said to my father, but her voice was not remotely reprimanding, for her face had broken out into the biggest smile I'd ever seen, and from that moment I knew I would be able to keep Lassie for good, and we soon became inseparable. I was so eager to return home from school every day. I couldn't wait for the school bus to drop me at the corner, and I would literally run back home. Lassie would be waiting for me very enthusiastically. She always seemed to know when I was coming back home. I'd see her head peering at me through the hallway window, and then she would charge over to the front door, her tail wagging furiously, and she would yap excitedly. And once I entered the house, she'd be all over me, giving me the welcome of note and covering me with affectionate soppy kisses. She unequivocally knew she was my own dog, although she faithfully loved and adored every single member of my family. Now she was gone from our lives, like the most perfectly beautiful shooting star you ever saw, that was there one moment, gone the next. I stared up at the road in bemusement, unable to believe what had happened. Tears streamed down my cheeks unabashedly. I began to uncontrollably sob, and I'd never cried like this before. I was blinded by my tears as I ran towards my home, barely being able to see where I was going, because my eyesight had become blurred. My heart was so broken by an insurmountable grief. Mrs. Trellis stopped me in my tracks along the path, looking at me with such pity in her eyes, and then I threw myself into her loving arms and began to sob into her chest. She patted my back gently.
"There you go. Have a good old cry, Jack. It's very good for you to cry. Let it all out. You better come inside, my dear. I'll give you something sweet to drink. You've had the most dreadful shock. I'm so sorry, Jack. I don't know what to say. What an awful thing to happen to you."
Mrs. Trellis kindly led me into her kitchen and gave me a sweet drink to calm my nerves.
"I saw the whole thing, Jack," she explained to me. "The man in the red Hyundai. He came out from nowhere, didn't he? I thought there must be something wrong with his car's tires. I saw he'd recruited you to investigate them for him. And the next thing I know, the man grabs poor Lassie, pops him into his car and whizzes away with your beautiful dog. I mean, who does that? He must be completely sick in the head. We must go and file a police report as soon as we can. It's such a damn pity I wasn't wearing my glasses at the time, because I couldn't read the man's number plates."
As you can imagine, losing Lassie was the most terrible thing that had ever happened to me in my young life. I couldn't believe anyone could be that cruel as to abduct my dog in broad daylight like that, and to trick me into helping them to look at their tire, while all the time they had ulterior motives. I was confounded, as were many people in our local neighbourhood, that such a dreadful thing could happen in such a peaceful little suburb like ours. Many people were extremely worried that their four-legged friends might also be abducted, so everyone became guarded, and for a while visits to the doggy park decreased. My parents watched me spiral into a very deep depression. My father even offered to buy me another golden retriever to replace Lassie, but I didn't want just another dog. I only wanted Lassie. I remember he sat on my bed one evening. He avoided any eye contact with me, because he could see I was so sorrowful, and very diplomatically he said to me,
"Son, I'm very sorry about what has happened. To Lassie, I mean. No one deserves this, especially not you. You were devoted to that dog, and had wanted a golden retriever for years and years. Sometimes, son, bad things happen to good people. I don't know what to say. There are no words, are there?"
"But why can't the police find her?" I cried out indignantly. "We filed a report, didn't we? I gave them a description of the driver. I told them what he looked like."
"Son, you didn't get the man's license plates, did you? The man you and Mrs. Trellis described to the police could fit the profile of many Americans. He could be anyone, and is probably long gone by now. He might not even live in this state."
My father looked rather uncomfortable for a moment, shifting awkwardly on the bed.
"Look, son, I don't know how to say this to you. Your mother's tried to discourage me from having this conversation with you, but I just feel I need to say this. I know this is not what you want to hear, but I just don't think Lassie will ever be coming back any time soon. I know you've been grieving her loss, but it's unlikely you will ever see her again. So how about I buy you another golden retriever puppy? I know it won't be the same as Lassie, but I'm sure you will grow to love her as much, maybe even more so. Don't you get it, Dad? I could never love another dog more than Lassie. I don't want any other dog. I only want Lassie. I know, son. This is very difficult for us all, not just for you. We all miss Lassie very, very much. There is no doubt that Lassie was a remarkable and very fine dog. Wherever she is, I'm sure she's been taken very good care of. And she's a very easy dog to love. I'm sure she will have a good life, so you mustn't worry about her. But why? I said, my eyes flooding with tears. Why would someone steal my dog, Daddy? Why? I don't understand. Because, son, there are some seriously sick people in the world. And let's not kid, Lassie was young and a fine-looking golden retriever. That's probably why she was taken. Golden retrievers are expensive dogs and highly sought after. I just want you to think over what I've said, son. Me and your mum are very worried about you. I've never seen you so despondent before. Mrs. Smith, your English teacher at school, contacted your mother the other day to say that you stare out of the school window all day long, and you look so desperately sorrowful. Everyone is extremely worried about you, son. I really think you should consider my offer to get you another puppy. I contacted the breeder. She has a golden retriever who is one of Lassie's sisters, who's expecting puppies. Think about it, son, said my father, walking towards the door and closing it slowly behind him. The very idea of getting another puppy to replace Lassie was unbearable for me. That evening I cried long into the night into my pillow. I worried so much about where Lassie was, what had become of her, whether she was happy or not. I couldn't bear to think of her being abused, or feeling as if I'd abandoned her. All I could do was pray in earnest that God would bring Lassie home to me, for my whole world had lost its purpose without my dog being around. And after my prayer, an extraordinary peace came over me, and for some unfathomable reason, I really got a sense that this wasn't the last time I'd see Lassie. Gertie MacDouglas was not entirely happy. She was punctilious about how she liked things to be done, and that foolish man Marvin had let her down yet again. What was he thinking, abducting Lassie while driving his red Hyundai, with all the plates visibly on display for anyone to see? What if his number plate had been taken down by a snoopy neighbour, so that all the dots would finally lead straight to her? And she couldn't allow that to happen. She'd received a phone call from the annoying, incompetent man, telling her in a very sombre tone of voice, "It's done." "Well, I should think it's done. I can't believe it, Marvin. You've taken long enough. I'm glad to finally hear it. I thought you were backtracking on me for a moment." "That's because your so-called substitute grandson, or whatever you like to call him, didn't take the dog for a walk all day. I thought you said he'd take the dog for a walk at lunchtime, but that didn't happen. I waited and waited, and finally in the late afternoon I saw him. I almost gave up. Do you have any idea how hot it was in that car of mine? It was sweltering. I felt like I was in a sauna. Anyway, I intercepted him on the road. I got the bloody dog. It keeps whining all the time. Just so you know, Gertie, I didn't enjoy doing this one bit. It was awful taking that boy's dog from him. I felt cruel doing such a thing. He seemed like a sweet kid. He must be devastated to lose his four-legged friend. I feel like a prize jerk doing this. I can't think what you've got against the young man." "It's none of your business, Marvin. I have my reasons for doing this. But I hope you didn't make a spectacle of yourself or draw any unnecessary or unwanted attention to your car. People would likely notice a red Hyundai loitering around the neighbourhood for a very long period of time. It might have looked rather suspicious. It's so typical of you, Marvin, not to be very astute. You do things so sloppily. I wouldn't be surprised if the police were hot on your trail. And if they are, just so you know, I had nothing to do with this. This was all your idea. As far as they're concerned, I don't even know who you are. So is that how you're going to play it, Gertie? If the police are on to me, you're going to pretend you don't know who I am? Well, pretty much. I'll just say you're my next-door neighbour, and I know nothing about you at all. That's rich coming from you. Anyway, everything went smoothly. So relax, Gertie. It was quiet in the neighbourhood, but I resent you calling me sloppy. I'm anything but I'll have you know, I will not appreciate you messing me around any more. This chapter, as far as I'm concerned, is finally closed. We had a deal, and I've stuck to my side of the bargain. Now you stick to yours, and don't you dare go blackmailing me again, because I'm not going to tolerate it next time. Blackmail? What on earth are you talking about, Marvin? Where did you get such a dreadful idea from? You were doing me a favour in return for my silence. A deal is a deal, is it not? One good turn for another, so to speak. Two neighbours looking out for each other. I think threatening to tell my wife Vanessa that I've been having an affair is blackmail, especially when you know it's not true, Gertie. I bumped into an ex-girlfriend of mine. She threw her arms around me. But the photographs you sneakily took with your cell phone look incriminating, because I kissed her. Yes, I admit I kissed her, but it meant nothing. I only agreed to do this damn thing for you, because I don't want to lose Vanessa over this. And I know how cunningly you can twist things to fit your own duplicitous agenda, Gertie. I've met people like you before, but I never thought I'd end up living next door to someone as insidious as you. Just so you know, I didn't feel remotely good about abducting the young boy's dog. It was an awful thing to do. If Vanessa knew about this, she'd be devastated. She'd be appalled by what I'd done. I'm appalled by what I've done. I feel sick to my stomach about it. And let me tell you, the dog has not stopped whining for a second. He hates being parted from his friend. Oh, don't worry about that dreadful bag of fleas. She'll do just fine. Dogs are very resilient, you know. They bounce back pretty quickly, don't they? They adapt to a new environment easily. I don't think that's true in these circumstances. This poor female dog looks miserable to me. I can't imagine what her owner must feel like right now. I feel lousy doing a thing like this. If Vanessa knew anything about this, well, I can't imagine how she would react. Never mind about your wife, Marvin. Providing you play your cards right, she'll never know about any of this. Are you threatening me, Gertie? But of course not, Marvin. Where on earth did you get that absurd idea from? For the record, I think you could have done things a lot less cack-handedly, if you don't mind my saying so. I did rather expect better of you. At the very least, you should have put up fake number plates on your red Hyundai, or at least covered them up with a lot of mud so no one could read the numbers. But then again, you weren't terribly bright in that regard. What if someone had read your number plates? I just am very concerned about this getting back to me. And if it does, I know nothing about you. I hope you appreciate that. Are we going to go around and around in circles, Gertie, talking about the same thing again and again? About how completely cack-handed and useless I am? Relax, woman. No one read my number plate. So keep your hair on, will you? I'm not a complete imbecile, I'll have you know. I had to think fast, didn't I, when I saw the boy walking down the street? I wasn't expecting to see him. I was about to drive away. And then he appeared out of nowhere. I recognized him and his dog immediately from the photograph you gave me. I had to act quickly. Well, what are you going to do with the dog, Marvin? I don't want it ever finding its way back home again. Is that understood? You must find a brand new home for the dog. Put her up for adoption. I'm relying on you to do this. I'm surprised you even care about the dog. Of course I care about the dog. I'm not completely heartless, you know. What are you going to do with it? I'll make a plan, said Marvin. Don't worry about it. I'll find a good home for her. These kind of dogs are in high demand. See to it that you do. I want none of this coming back to haunt me. Do you understand, Marvin? Because if it does, it'll all be on you. Gertie, why did you insist I did this in the first place? Why do you want to punish this poor young kid who owns the dog? He seemed like a sweet child to me. What have you got against him? I've got nothing against young Jack, snapped Gertie. If you must know, it's the damned dog. I can't stand the sight of her. I know the family would never get rid of the dreadful bugger if I didn't intercede. I've done the family a big favour, only they won't realise it because people like that can be so damn short-sighted and stupid. But in time they'll realise that they're much better off without having a dog around. There was a pause at the end of the line. But what if they get another dog to replace the one they've lost? I'm not going to do this again, Gertie, for you. Do you understand? There is no way I'm ever going to abduct another dog. You get it? I've done this once, and I will not be doing it again. I get it, Marvin. You won't be needing to do this again. Don't worry about that. I'll make absolutely sure the Strattons don't get another dog. But when Gertie ended the phone call, her heart began to flip-flop. Damn, why hadn't she thought about that before? She knew how pathetically besotted that Jack had been over Lassie. What if his parents decided to replace the dog for him and get him another big blonde flea ball? How would she get rid of yet another dog without it looking very suspicious? She didn't want the Stratton family to ever know that she was the one responsible for Lassie's abduction. If the Strattons learnt the bitter truth of her involvement in the dog's abduction, they might never want to speak to her again, and she couldn't allow that to happen. Gertie had successfully managed to blackmail her next-door neighbour, Marvin Thomas. She had always known how useless and pathetically weak he was as a man. It was a stroke of good fortune that she had been enjoying a coffee at the Pecan Maple Cafe in town, when who should come charging through the door but Marvin Thomas himself. A young, pretty woman in the cafe, who appeared to be waiting for him rather patiently, had thrown her arms around him, and for a brief moment they had kissed, locking lips together, until Marvin had stepped back, apologizing profusely by saying, "I shouldn't have done that. I'm a married man. I don't know what came over me. I must apologize." "It was my fault," the woman replied. "I got carried away. I was the one that encouraged you. It's so good to see you. I really need your advice, Marvin, about something that's really important. That's why I called you. Thank you for coming." Gertie had eavesdropped on the conversation between Marvin and this mysterious woman. She had surreptitiously taken some snapshots of the two of them together, involved in that kiss. She knew she would take the photograph to show Vanessa, her next-door neighbour, so that she could see what her husband was getting up to behind her back. If Vanessa were to see the incriminating evidence that Gertie had on her cell phone, she would ultimately kick her husband out of her house for good, and Gertie wanted to see that happen, for she had never liked Marvin terribly much, and she very much disapproved of the fact that he mowed the lawn every Saturday with his shirt off, because it lowered the whole tone of the neighbourhood. It also made it look as if she was living next door to a man who couldn't afford to buy himself a decent shirt, or couldn't be bothered to put on one, because he was just far too sloppy. It was in that moment Gertie realised that she could get Marvin to do her bidding, and use the photographs as a perfect form of blackmail. She had promptly called him over to the house, in the pretence she needed him to help her hang up a picture that she had purchased from the local fair. Marvin had been quite affronted when Gertie had presented him with the photographic evidence of him kissing another woman. She told him she had copies of the photograph, so if he smashed up her cell phone, it would be a pretty much useless endeavour. She had him between the short and curlies, and she knew it. So did he. "It's not what you think, Gertie," he protested. "That's a photograph of my ex-girlfriend, Sasha Jones. We met up in the coffee shop, that's all. She wanted some advice from me. It was perfectly innocent, I can assure you. You know me, Gertie.
I would never cheat on Vanessa. She's the quintessential love of my life. You're not going to tell her about this. Please, for God's sake, don't. I'm begging you. It would break her heart.
If you say your so-called rendezvous with this ex-girlfriend of yours, Sasha Jones, was so perfectly innocent as you claim, why are you kissing her so passionately in this photograph? Everybody in the coffee shop was witness to this. It was very inappropriate, if you don't mind my saying so. I wonder what Vanessa would say about this photograph. I can't imagine she would be best pleased to see it. Can you?
Why are you doing this, Gertie? Why are you confronting me with this photograph? I can't understand why you're doing this. You don't understand, Marvin protested. The kiss was a mistake. It was fleeting. It happened very quickly. I guess we got caught up in the moment. Sasha and I, we go back a long way. We have a long history between us. It was nostalgic meeting up with her again after all this time. In that moment, we got carried away for a second, but we both realized it was a mistake. I met up with her because she wanted advice. That's all it was. Please, Gertie, I'm begging you, don't tell Vanessa about any of this. If she were to see this photograph, she'd believe the worst of me. She'd file for a divorce, God forbid. You know what Vanessa's like. If she thinks I cheated on her, she'll throw me out with the dirty bathwater. There are no second chances with someone like Vanessa.
Look, Marvin, I won't show Vanessa this photograph, but on one condition only.
Marvin's face paled. His eyes grew round.
What is it you want me to do for you, Gertie? He asked, almost grovelling.
Gertie hid the happy smile behind her straight lips. Good, she thought to herself. Marvin was as malleable as a piece of clay. He'd do anything to protect his relationship with Vanessa. So now was her time to go in for the kill.
I need a small favour, Marvin, from you. In return for my silence, that is.
What kind of favour are you asking of me, Gertie? Why don't I like the sound of this? You don't want me to kill someone for you, do you?
Absolutely not. As if. I'd never ask something like that of you. No, this is completely different. I just want you to abduct a golden retriever for me called Lassie. I'll give you the details concerning the dog. It belongs to a family member of mine, a young boy, 14-year-old boy called Jack Stratton. The dog gets walked every day by Jack, usually after he returns home from school. So you can keep out a watchful eye on the dog. And at the first opportunity, I want you to grab the female golden retriever and whisk her away. You need to abduct her and find a new home for her. But I want you to be clever about how you go about this. The boy must not know I am behind this abduction under any circumstances. Is that understood? If you do exactly as I say, your secret will remain safe with me. You have my word on this.
But I can't do that, Gertie. Are you insane? You're asking me to steal a young boy's pet. That's an awful thing to do. I can't imagine how the boy will feel if I take his dog away from him.
That is exactly what I'm asking of you, Marvin. Nothing less and nothing more. It's very simple, very straightforward, and easy enough for you to do.
But I can't do that, Gertie. That's disgusting. As I keep saying to you, the kid probably loves that dog. It's cruel to do a thing like that.
Well, if you can't do as I say, Marvin, then I'm very sorry, but I can't keep your secret, and I won't. I wonder what Vanessa will think when she sees these incriminating photographs of you surreptitiously meeting up with your ex-girlfriend. I think the photograph of you kissing her so passionately speaks 1,000 words, don't you? It was a very passionate kiss as far as I was concerned.
It wasn't a passionate kiss. It was just a little peck. You can't do this, Gertie. You can't do this to me. It's not fair. It's not right.
I think you will find that I can, Marvin, Gertie had said very smugly, with a very satisfied-looking smirk written all over her face.
All right, I'll do it then. But just so you know, Gertie, I'm not happy about this at all. But I'd do anything to save my marriage. I rather thought you'd say that. You're very sensible, Marvin. That's a very wise thing for you to do. I'll give you all the details in regards to the dog, and I want you to abduct her as soon as possible." As Gertie had expected, Marvin had buckled like putty in her hands, just as she thought he would. He was so pathetic. But he'd been useful for her purposes. At long last she'd finally got him to abduct Lassie. "Stupid, stupid man," she mumbled angrily under her breath. "He's so nearly messed up. But at least the deed has been done as far as I'm concerned. And now I never have to attend another Friday night dinner at the Strattons' house and watch that dreadful dirtball of a dog slobbering around the place and covering my clothes with her blonde hair." That Friday night, after Lassie's abduction, when Gertie had arrived for Friday night dinner at the Strattons, she had been met by a very glum household, all desperately upset because that flea bag was no longer around. The whole Stratton family were absolutely pathetic, she couldn't help but think. "Something dreadful's happened, Gertie," Katie Stratton had informed her, gesturing for Gertie to come into the house. Gertie had pretended to be surprised. "What has happened?" she asked. "Is everything all right? If you don't mind my saying, dear, but you look rather peaky. You're not feeling poorly, are you, by any chance?" "It's Jack's dog. Someone's abducted him in broad daylight, would you believe, on our street this afternoon. What is the world coming to when someone does an insane thing like that? As you can imagine, poor Jack is absolutely devastated. We all are. As let's just say Lassie was such a special, much-loved member of our family. No doubt the man who abducted her knew exactly what he was doing, and knew about how valuable her breed is. So is probably intent on selling her to someone for a substantial sum of money." It had been a struggle for Gertie to purse her lips and not to smile. "I'm so sorry to hear that, dear. I don't think that Lassie would sell for very much. She's 2 years old already. But it is terrible news that she's been abducted. I always felt that you lived in such a safe area. But obviously I'm wrong about that." Jack had been standing in the doorway when Gertie entered the house. His red eyes were puffy from crying. He had said, "I don't believe you're sorry for a second, are you, Gertie? You never liked Lassie, did you? You were always trying to run her down with your mouth. You're probably secretly pleased she's been abducted, so that your clothes don't get covered with all her blonde hairs." Katie had turned around and snapped at her son, her face growing pink with embarrassment. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Gertie. You must excuse Jack for being so terribly rude." "I know you're upset, Jack. We all are. It's a travesty that someone has taken Lassie. But there's no need to be rude to Gertie. Of course she's upset your dog has been abducted. Gertie wouldn't want you to lose your dog. I want you to apologize to Gertie for insinuating such an unkind thing." "I'm not apologizing to someone who's glad my dog is gone. Never! I'm never apologizing." It had been difficult to enjoy Friday dinner with the Stratton household that evening. Gertie could see everyone was in very low spirits, and all visibly upset about the dog being abducted. What was wrong with the Strattons, she couldn't help but wonder. Could they not see how much better things were without that flea bag around? The house felt so much quieter, so much more peaceful, without that dreadful dog running around the place, wagging its tail all the time, threatening to break anything its tail encountered. Now, when she attended Friday night dinner with the Strattons, she wouldn't have to worry about getting her clothes covered in white hairs. Bertie hated dogs with a passion, and cats, as far as she was concerned, were almost as bad. But at least they weren't so slobbery. But all animals were filthy. She had done the Stratton family a favour. In time they would see how much better off their lives were without Lassie around. Gertie enjoyed spending Friday night dinner with the Stratton family. She considered herself to be the children's substitute grandmother, although it would seem that Jack had made it painfully obvious he didn't like her at all,
because she didn't like dogs. But he was still a work in progress as far as she was concerned, and would finally come around in the end. She was sure of it. 2 months later, Jack's account. "But why?" I challenged my mother, pulling a face. "Do we really have to do this?"
"I'm afraid so, Jack. You know what Gertie's like. You know how insistent that woman can be. It's impossible to say no to her."
"But why can't you say no to her, Mum? Stand up for yourself, for goodness sake. Daddy always says you let Gertie intimidate you."
"I do no such thing, Jack. Of course I can stand up to the woman."
"But, Mum, you yourself said Gertie's only going away for a 2-week holiday. It's not that long. Why would she want us to live in her house? Surely she can leave her house unattended for 2 weeks. When we go away, that's what we do, don't we? And even when Lassie was around, we took her away with us, so no one had to look after her. I'm sure Gertie's house will be fine and will still be standing when she gets back from her holiday," I said sarcastically.
"Gertie can get paranoid, as you know only too well. She's very concerned that if she goes away, someone might break into her house. These days you can't be sure if someone is secretly watching your property or not. Gertie's a very wealthy woman. She's got some valuable antiques in that house of hers, and some expensive paintings that could go for a sizable amount of money. So her house would likely be targeted by a burglar, if they were to know she had gone away. Criminals these days are very savvy, you know, Jack. Gertie wants someone around on the premises so that any intruders will keep away if they know that somebody's present in the house. Besides anything else, she wants me to look after her plants that need to be watered once a week. And she wants us to maintain a presence on the property so people will know that the house is always occupied."
"But why must we move into Gertie's house for her when we live here, Mum? Can't she find someone else to look after her premises for her? There are people who do that for a living, aren't there? You get house sitters online, don't you? Why is Gertie always getting us to do her dirty work for her?"
"Gertie would never settle for a stranger looking after her house. Surely you know that, Jack. Anyway, apart from anything else, I've agreed to do this for her. Your father will be staying here at our house while we're living at Gertie's, and he's kindly promised to paint some of the bedrooms in our home, which will be a big bonus for us because it's about time they got attended to. He says he's behind on the general maintenance of our house, and will be glad if we're out of his hair for a while, so that he can get things done. There's a loose cupboard that needs readjusting in the kitchen, a dripping tap that's been causing no end of problems, and a loo that's not flushing as efficiently as it should be. So while we're away, he'll oversee to those problems, hopefully fix them for us. We'll be moving into Gertie's house, just the 3 of us, only for 2 weeks, no more than that. It's a lovely area, beautiful woodland trails behind the property. You and your sister can go cycling there as often as you like. It'll be a lovely change of scene for all of us, Jack, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised of how much you will enjoy yourself there. I know you've never liked Gertie, but her property is spacious and very upmarket. A welcome change to our home, don't you think?"
"But why are you doing this for Gertie, Mum? What has she ever done for us?" I piped indignantly. "She comes to dinner every Friday night, doesn't she? She picks fault at everything you cook. She tells you when she thinks you're picking up a little weight, or when she abhors your hairstyle or a dress you're wearing, and you never ever say a mean word back to her."
"Because, Jack, it's not in my nature to be rude to my guests, not even Gertie. You know the woman. She lets her tongue run away with her at times, but I'm well used to her by now, so anything she says does not offend me any more. I've learnt to rise above it, and you should follow in my example too. You take that woman far too seriously, Jack."
"But I hate her," I said. "She thinks she's a replacement grandmother for me because your sister died, but she'll never ever be that."
"Now, Jack, aren't you being a tad unkind about the poor woman?"
"She's not poor, Mum," I said indignantly. "She's stinking rich, and I have not seen her look so happy for Friday night dinner as she does now. because she's glad Lassie isn't around anymore. She hated Lassie, and that's why I hate her, I said with conviction. Last Friday she was saying how nice the house smelt without the bag of fleas around. She called Lassie a bag of fleas. She said she was glad she could sit on our couch without getting covered in hairs. She exaggerates all the time, because our house doesn't smell, and she barely got any of Lassie's hairs on her clothes when she came to our house. That's true, Jack, I know it is. But you must remember, one dog hair on Gertie's clothes is too many for the woman. I know she's not an easy woman to understand, Jack. But it's not necessary to chastise her character like this, just because she doesn't like animals. She's a bit of a clean freak, we both know that. Some people are that way inclined. It doesn't make her a bad person, you know. I know she's capriciously difficult to understand, and her perception of the world is very different to our own. But at the end of the day, I need to remind you she is family, and blood is thicker than water. People that don't like animals should never ever be trusted, I said adamantly. I still think it's very suspicious the way her husband died all those years ago, in that so-called freak accident. I bet she killed him, because she wanted all his money. I wouldn't be remotely surprised if that is what really happened. I wouldn't put anything past that money-grubbing woman. My sister Angie interceded. Jack's right, Mum. I wouldn't be surprised if Gertie did kill her husband. Remember, they were going to get divorced, and then very conveniently he cleans his rifle one day, forgets it's loaded, and ends up shooting himself. Something doesn't add up. I bet she killed him. I think Gertie is a calculating woman. I really do. My mother looked physically appalled and disgusted that Angie and I were talking about her mother's sister like this. But there really was something questionable about how her husband had died all those years ago. And even my father had said as much, but my mother had shut him down at once and said he was talking absolute nonsense, and that of course Gertie wouldn't harm a fly. I wasn't so sure that was true. Gertie's husband had been cleaning his rifle, according to Gertie, and forgot that it was loaded. I just didn't buy that for a single second. But as usual, Gertie had persuaded everybody it was an accident. She said that her husband had been suffering from lapses in memory and was increasingly absent-minded. She said it wasn't the first time he'd cleaned his rifle fully loaded. Even the coroner confirmed her husband's death to be accidental. But me and my sister and my dad weren't fooled for a single second, although Gertie had undoubtedly pulled the wool over my mother's eyes. Yes, my mother knew that Gertie was cantankerous and belligerently capricious at times, but she definitely didn't think Gertie was capable of murder. But the look that woman gave Lassie sometimes was a look that spoke 1,000 words as far as I was concerned, and that look said, "I'd kill you myself, you flea bag, if only I got the chance." Gertie's husband had been an upstanding man of noble character, who I'd liked very much. He had also been punctiliously methodical in everything he did, and I had never noticed that he had any signs of becoming absent-minded. On the contrary, I thought he was a whole lot sharper than Gertie actually was. I knew in my gut he'd have never ever cleaned a fully loaded rifle. He wasn't a complete moron. I do know that Gertie was not remotely happy about getting a divorce. When her husband told her one day that he couldn't tolerate living with her for a second longer and was filing for a divorce, Gertie was incensed. I think that although Gertie didn't care that her husband was ending their relationship, what she did care about was losing out on his vast fortune. My guess was she actually shot him and successfully made it look like an accident. As it happens, when I was staying at Gertie's house, I did happen to find a book in her bookcase about how to commit the perfect murder, and I always wondered if the book had inspired Gertie to do the unthinkable as far as her husband was concerned, but that was something that could never be proved. One thing was for sure, I didn't want to spend any time at Gertie's house, even if she did live in a beautiful home in a lovely area, as it meant living among all Gertie's things that probably even smelt of the nauseating woman, and the thought of it was quite discombobulating to say the very least. "How can
you talk about Gertie like this," my mother said. "I know you don't like her, Jack, but suggesting that she deliberately killed her husband is deplorable. The both of you should be ashamed." My mother was filled with indignance as she glared at me and my sister, almost as if we'd both committed an unforgivable sin for merely expressing our opinion on the matter. "I don't care what you say, Mum," Angie said, "but I know Gertie killed her husband. And anyway, I don't want to go and stay at her house," she protested. "Why do we have to go and stay there? This is our home. I don't want to live in Gertie's house among all her things. I've had my fill of her every single Friday night dinner. And Jack's right. She's glad that Lassie's gone." "Enough of tearing Gertie apart, children. You're like a couple of coyotes, aren't you? Tearing up an innocent animal apart. That's just horrendous. You shouldn't be speaking about her like this." "You mean tearing a skunk apart?" I said spitefully. "One that smells rancidly bad." "Enough, Jack. Would you please stop demeaning Gertie like this? It's most unbecoming of you. Do I really need to spell it out to the both of you as to why the three of us are going to stay at Gertie's? It seems that I do. You both know Gertie is a very wealthy woman. She's offered to pay me handsomely for moving into her house for 2 weeks to look after the place. It's money I cannot afford to refuse. Sometimes me and your father struggle to pay all the bills, so making this extra money is a godsend for us. It's for this reason I couldn't refuse Gertie's request. Don't you worry, I'll make sure we have a good time together. I promise you that." "But what about Dad?" I asked. "Were you not listening to a single thing I said, Jack? How many times do I need to repeat myself to you kids? Your father is going to be just fine at home. He's going to do some maintenance projects around the house while we're away. I've already told you that. He'll be fine. We'll see him in 2 weeks' time when Gertie returns from her holiday." Gertie lived 45 minutes away from us, in an area in Philadelphia where, like many parts of this state, urban can actually meet up with the natural world on your front doorstep, as if both are masterfully intertwined, rather like two twin sisters that hang out together but are extremely different. One is sporty and laid back, the other very modern and sophisticated, and yet they manage to live together side by side very comfortably. Bertie lived in an affluent neighbourhood, where the houses boasted reasonably sizable properties. Bertie's house and the other houses in her street were fortunate enough to overlook a heavily wooded area that boasted a plethora of hiking trails that many adventurous outdoorsy types of people would explore, especially over the weekends. It was quite common to see cyclists wearing helmets and cycling shorts ambling down the trail, or a couple taking their dogs for a walk there. Gertie had lived in her classic timeless-looking home for over 40 long years. The house was painted white and had huge bay windows and a grey roof, along with a navy blue front door. It boasted a perfectly manicured front lawn, with pruned hedges and flower beds that boasted hardy perennials and plenty of white roses, and an abundance of glossy greenery. The house smelt pungently of Gertie, which was most unsettling for me. If Gertie weren't alive, I would seriously believe her ghost was probably haunting the place. Everywhere I went, I could smell her odious lavender perfume, and her sweet-scented talcum powder, which was extremely overpowering, and made me feel queasy and green at the gills. It was impossible to get that nasty, cloying smell out of the house, even when we opened all the windows as wide as we possibly could to air the place. It was as if Gertie's insufferable perfume had been soaked up by all the furnishings in the house, rather like a sponge. The interior of Gertie's lavishly appointed house was an opulent maze of sumptuously expensive resplendent antiques that she had collected over the years, that looked like they belonged in a castle. Many of these deluxe, rather palatial purchases had been made at antiques fairs and purchased at exclusive designer antique shops. There were glass cabinets displaying expensive, highly sought-after collectibles and artifacts that Gertie had collected abroad, that were probably worth a fortune. Everything in Gertie's house was grand and swanky-looking, almost as if everything the woman owned had an expensive price tag attached to it. The luxuriant red curtains were heavy and velvety,
and expensive ritzy Persian carpets were spread across perfectly polished parquet floors. In truth, I felt as if I'd booked into a fancy boutique hotel for the next couple of weeks, but there was nothing remotely comfortable about staying in a house where you were terrified of dropping your Coca-Cola in case you left a nasty stain on the furniture, although there was a small, rather spiteful part of myself that would have enjoyed doing just that. But I knew that should I do such a thing, I would come against my mother's wrath, and that was not worth my while. I hasten to say that I was rather miffed to find that there was not a single speck of dust anywhere to be found in Gertie's house, for it affirmed to me my very worst fears, that Gertie was more than a little OCD. Despite the house's lavish presentation, it felt soulless and lacked any charm. I say that because it didn't feel lived in, whereas in our house there was always evidence of a life being lived, from a shoe lying haphazardly or rather untidily in the middle of the floor, or a newspaper left casually open on the coffee table. But in Gertie's house everything was pristine, so unnaturally perfect. You could have eaten your food off the floor without a problem. No wonder the woman had hated coming to our house for Friday night dinner when Lassie was around. It was absolutely insufferable for her to get Lassie's hair onto her clothes, and Gertie probably had an extreme aversion to dirt. No wonder she'd called Lassie a big bag of fleas, when of course the dog was anything but. I figured it would not be the end of the world living in the lap of luxury for just a couple of weeks, especially as my mother had been paid for the privilege. My bedroom looked like something out of a designer old-world vintage magazine. But I started to get used to it, and I liked the fact that it had pretty views over the woods at the back of the house, which at night were particularly breathtaking, under the light of a silvery moon. There was not a single day that didn't go by that I did not grieve the loss of my beloved dog Lassie. I felt a huge hole in my life without her around, but I tried to keep myself busily preoccupied so I didn't have to think about her too much. Every afternoon my mother would pick us up from school, which was a much longer road trip now that we were temporarily living a little further away. When we returned to Bertie's house, my sister and I would take our bicycles and go cycling down the country trail at the back of Gertie's home. It really did feel as if we were in the heart of the countryside. One day me and my sister, with the wind blowing in our hair, were both riding down the country trail when we decided to park our bikes against a couple of rather forlorn-looking trees. We chose to go exploring through an untamed area that was marked strictly prohibited. Why this was the case, I wasn't sure, but for some reason my sister and I were keen to go off the beaten track. I mean, what harm could it possibly do? And we were both curious as to why that part of the trail was prohibited.
Jack, come over here. Look, there's a path going down to the left here. It's marked strictly prohibited, so we're not allowed to go down this path. Why do you think that's the case? I've no idea, I said, but I mean to find out. The irony of ironies was, had the warning sign not been erected, the adventurous spirit within the both of us would probably not have been tickled, but doing something we weren't supposed to be doing felt both thrilling and daredevil of us. Me and my sister eagerly ventured deeper into the woodgrove, down the parts of the woods forbidden for pedestrians to use, and was clearly not part of the advised trail. We noticed how overgrown and unkempt it all but was. We discovered random trees had been lying on the ground. Moss and lichen had decided to cover the bark in an abundance of life, while thorny briars and thickets of foliage were entangled in burgeoning clusters, so much so it was sometimes hard to see the wood for the trees. Me and my sister were very glad we were both wearing sneakers, as we trampled over the undulating, forsaken ground that was swollen with rocks that were embedded in the soil, and jutted out rather angrily like teeth. Some of the trees in this part of the wood were so ancient that their roots were poking through the ground rather obnoxiously, like an octopus's tentacles, and on many occasions me and my sister very nearly lost our footing, as some of the roots were very treacherous. "I don't like it around here, Jack," my sister said suddenly, turning around to look at me. I could see there was disquiet in her brown eyes. She seemed to be trembling, as if suddenly she'd become quite uneasy. "What is it?" I asked her. "Are you afraid we'll be caught trampling along prohibited ground? Don't tell me you're a wuss," I said teasingly, as I knew calling my sister a wuss would rile her up. My sister pulled a face.
"It's not that, Jack," she said. "I'm not afraid. In that sense, I mean. But something is really off around here, don't you think? It feels foreboding, airy perhaps." "What are you talking about?" I asked her. My sister shrugged. She lowered her voice to a faint whisper. "Listen," she said. "Can't you hear what I'm hearing?" "I'm listening," I said. "I can't hear anything." "That's it," said Angie. "Don't you see, Jack? Why isn't there any bird song around here? Why is everything so unnaturally quiet? It feels menacing, don't you think?" My sister was right. Something wasn't right about the woods. I was surprised I hadn't noticed it before, and that Angie had needed to point this out to me. The woods in these parts were so quiet. The only thing I could hear was the rustle of leaves brought on by a soft breeze, but I heard nothing else. The familiar sounds of the birds in the tree branches above our heads, or insects buzzing around the wild flowers, could not be heard any more, and that in itself was peculiarly strange, paradoxical, inauspiciously threatening, you could say. Something just wasn't right, and I could suddenly feel the ill-omened pretentiousness the woodgrove seemed to invite, that sent a shiver down my spine, a silent warning, perhaps, that something was very much amiss. I tried, of course, to remain nonchalantly calm, so as to keep my sister at ease. I knew if she saw how flustered I really was, it would also increase her fear. "You're right," I admitted. "It does feel somewhat creepy. We should probably leave now." We were about to turn around and return to the original footpath when we heard an ear-piercing scream that, like a knife, went right through me in an icy chill. Angie and I looked at each other with a start. Angie had almost jumped out of her skin, her face growing as white as a sheet, her eyes filling with fear. "Oh, my God! Did you hear that, Jack? We need to get out of here quickly. I told you something wasn't right about this place. I could feel it in my guts." "Someone's in trouble, though, Angie," I said. "We can't just up and leave, can we? What if they need our help?" "I don't care if someone's in trouble. I really don't. I don't want to stick around to find out," said my sister. "I'm freaked out about this part of the woods, Jack. It's really sinister in here. I've got chills running down my spine. We need to get the hell out of here as quickly as we can. I'm not hanging around out here to find out who the owner of that scream is." "But someone might be in trouble, Angie," I insisted. "You heard the scream yourself. We better go and find out what's going on. It's the right thing for us to do, Angie. It would be irresponsible of us to ignore a cry for help, wouldn't it?" Angie's face grew all the more fearful. She was obstinately resistant. "I'm sure the scream was nothing," she said hurriedly. "They say that you hear all kinds of strange sounds in the woods. I think we should leave now. I'm not happy sticking around here." "If that's how you feel, Angie, you go back to the main trail and find your way back to Gertie's house. I need to check the noise out here for myself to ensure no one is in trouble." "Please don't make me go back on the trail on my own," Angie practically begged me. "I don't want to be on my own, Jack. I feel scared, really scared. Someone's watching us, I know they are." "Then if you don't want to go back alone, I guess you're stuck with me. Don't worry, we won't be long. How would you feel, Angie, if you learnt someone had a fall in the woods? They died of exposure. Imagine if their bones were discovered months later, and we both knew we could have been in a position to save that person and call for help. Could you live with yourself knowing that?" "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Jack. I told you the scream was probably nothing." All of a sudden we heard a shrill scream. It was definitely that of a woman. There was no doubt about that in my mind. This time me and my sister Angie completely forgot about all our trepidation. We unhesitantly ran towards the scream. I was in no doubt that someone must be in grievous trouble. Maybe they'd taken a nasty fall. Perhaps they'd got their foot ensnared in an old animal trap. Anything was possible. Gertie had told us that in this woodgrove along the footpath, a while back, someone had got their foot ensnared in an ancient trap, and had almost lost their foot over it in the process. If there were traps still lying around and about this place, no wonder parts of this woodgrove were prohibited for people to access. My sister and I followed the noise of those screams, and then we stopped dead in our tracks. We stood several feet away from a strange-looking woman. She was wearing a white dress that wasn't so white anymore, as it was covered in the filth of dirty stains. Her hair was a tangle of brown curls. She was bent over on all fours in the ground, rather like a wild animal. She was digging and scratching the ground furiously with her bitten fingernails. She was pulling up wads of soil in her palms, almost as if she was on a beach making a sand castle of sorts. The ground she appeared to be clawing so frantically was hard and unyielding, not exactly soft. While she was doing this, she screamed again, so loudly that the sound caused my inner organs to rattle rather precariously and my heart to erratically bounce around in my chest. Angie was staring at the woman with wide, bug-like eyes. The scene spread out before us was so incredibly bewildering. I didn't know what to make of it. I'd never seen anyone behaving so absurdly before. "Ma'am," I said, running up to her, "are you all right? We heard you screaming." The woman looked up at me through wild brown eyes. Her face was smeared with dirt, which dribbled down her chin like chocolate stains, as if she'd been eating the dirt. It was hard to see what colour her skin exactly was, but the dirt was all over her face, so it made her eyes all the more pronounced, so they almost stood out on stalks. The woman looked up at me and then stared at Angie. She gave me and Angie what I can only describe as a menacious, demented-looking grin, displaying a full mouth of yellowing chipped teeth. The look she gave us was both predatory and carnal, sending icy cold chills down my spine. In that moment I knew there was something profoundly wrong with this woman. She clearly belonged in a mental asylum, or something. The woman let out a witch-like cackle that was so unsettling it turned my blood cold. I was about to tell my sister Angie we needed to leave at once. The woman began to scream again, like a deranged rabid dog. She ran towards my sister, violently throwing her onto the ground. Then she straddled my sister between her two powerful legs, holding her down. The woman began to violently pummel my sister with her fists, as if she was beating down spices with a pestle and mortar. Angie began to scream. "Get off me! You're hurting me! Get off! Please stop!" she cried out. "Jack! Stop her! Stop her, Jack! Get off my sister!" I cried out, trying to pull the woman off my sister, but she was surprisingly strong and resisted my efforts to drag her away. I let out a scream when the woman grabbed my hand, biting it so very hard that blood trickled down my skin, and my blood was on her teeth and dribbling down her chin in rivulets, while she continued to grin. I'd never seen anyone look so insidious in all my life. The next thing I knew, this deranged woman had her hands wrapped around my sister's neck. She began to squeeze it so hard, so much so that my sister's eyes were rolling in the back of her head, and she was gurgling. As the woman did this, she began to cackle like an old hag. I didn't know what on earth to do. I was desperate. I grabbed a stick that I found on the forest floor and began to hit the woman with it, but she willfully ignored me and continued to strangle my sister. It was almost as if she never felt the wallop of the stick I was using on her back. The next thing I knew, I heard this dreadful scream, like nothing I have heard before or since, and then I realized to my horror that the noise I was hearing was coming from my own throat. I felt so powerless against this woman, who was draining the life out of my sister, and if I didn't stop her strangling my sister, Angie would surely die. There was no time to lose. I could not believe such an undernourished, emaciated woman of such slight proportions could be so powerfully strong, so much so that my efforts to avenge her seemed completely fruitless, despite the fact that I'd hit her so very hard on her back that pools of blood were seeping through the white fabric of her dress. But still she continued on her murderous mission to strangle my sister, and nothing appeared to stop her. All of a sudden a huge stone was hurled through the trees. I had no idea where it had come from, but it landed perfectly on the woman's head. She fell back, releasing her hold on my sister's neck, let out a moan, and then everything went disturbingly silent. My sister was gurgling for a moment, struggling to draw breath. Blood was running down her mouth, but she urgently drew in some breaths and sat up looking rather dazed. I could see pink finger marks around her neck, from where the woman had attempted to strangle her. For a moment Angie was so dazed, so caught off guard, so confused, that neither she or I said a single thing. Finally she cried out,
"Jack, the woman tried to kill me. What was wrong with her? She was so wild."
We looked down at the woman. I quickly felt for a pulse, but I was shocked when I could see there was no rise and fall to her chest, and when I turned her head over, I saw there was a huge hole in the back of her skull, where the brain tissue was weeping out. It was an abysmal sight, one that I shall never forget as long as I live. Whoever she was definitely deceased, and I hate to say this, but all I could feel was relief. The wicked woman could not get her nasty hands on my sister again.
"You killed her, Jack,"
Angie said, looking confounded.
"Oh my God, you killed her. I asked you to stop her from hurting me, but you killed her."
"No, I didn't," I said. "A stone was hurled through those trees. It hit her square in the head. But I didn't do it," I promised her.
"But even if I had done so, it would have been self-defense. If she hadn't been knocked out, you'd be dead by now."
Me and my sister instinctively looked up towards the trees, from where the stone had apparently been flung, and lo and behold, staring at us through a pair of wide, dark, treacle-coloured eyes, was a Herculean-sized male Bigfoot that was so ponderous he was easily 10 foot tall, with a robust, powerfully built muscular body that was so incredibly strong, I'm in no doubt he could easily push a tree over without a problem. Now I really thought I had to be dreaming. Was I even seeing right? This was the creature that had flung the stone at the senile woman and killed her. If it had not intervened, my sister would probably be dead. I was not afraid of the male Bigfoot, and nor was my sister Angie, despite the fact that he was the most intimidating creature that I have ever beheld in my entire life. But in every respect, the Bigfoot, although enormous, was startlingly human, and with that humanity came a gentle kindness that was so tangible I could feel it, and I knew instinctively he meant us no harm. For a moment we stared at each other. The Bigfoot trotted over to the dead woman. He examined her carefully to see if she really was dead, and satisfied that this was indeed the case, the Bigfoot promptly threw the woman over his shoulders like a sack of potatoes. He turned around and looked at the both of us. He nodded very politely, and then turned around and disappeared into the woods, moving with such an incredible grace. Finally, he was gone from our sight. Me and my sister were so bemused for many days after this unorthodox cryptic event, we didn't even speak of the matter to each other. We knew every time we went into the grove that from now on we would be strictly sticking to the regular trail, as I would never dare venture into the prohibited part of the grove again. That was for sure. One evening, as me and my sister were retiring for bed, we heard a strange scratching sound at the front door.
"What on earth is that?"
my mother said, looking up from the magazine she was reading.
"Will you go and check it out, Jack, for me? I think someone might be at the door. I do hope it's not a raccoon."
I reluctantly made my way to the door, thinking that maybe it was a raccoon outside, ferreting around the place. But when I opened the door, I was then knocked over by a great big bundle of fluff, and then I realized in my amazement that it was Lassie. Tears spilled down my cheeks. I cradled Lassie lovingly in my arms, unable to believe that my dog had found me and that we had been reunited again. I had never been so happy in all my life. My mother and my sister came rushing over to Lassie, unable to believe what they were seeing. They greeted her with tears in their eyes, and then standing outside our door, watching all this going on, was a strange woman with blonde hair, blue eyes, and a befuddled expression written all over her face.
"Please mind my dog," she said. "Lassie, come back, will you? Please come back, girl. She's not normally like this," the woman apologized. "She just ran up to your house. I couldn't stop her."
Lassie ignored the woman and was covering me with wet, sloppy kisses, while I buried my face into her soft hair and cried.
"I can't believe it's you, Lassie. It's you. Where have you been, girl? I've missed you so much."
I looked up at the woman who was staring at me through round, questioning eyes, and without realizing it, she'd entered our hallway.
"This is my dog, ma'am,"
I told her, looking up at her apologetically.
"Her name is Lassie. She's been missing for 2 months, but now she's come back to us. This is a miracle."
The woman looked confounded.
"Lassie is your dog?"
she asked. She let out a sigh. "Stupid me. I can't believe I'm even asking you that. She's obviously your dog, young man. I've never seen her so excited to see anyone in all my life. I can see you have a very special bond with her. If you must know, I adopted her 2 months ago, when my husband brought her home. He was intending to put her up for adoption, but I wouldn't have it. He claimed the previous owners didn't want to keep her because she was too big for their small children. I begged him to let me keep the dog. Finally, he relented after much badgering. When Lassie ran off to Gertie's house a moment ago, I couldn't believe it. She seemed to have picked up an interesting scent trail that she really liked. I kept calling her to come back to me, but she refused to listen, and she's never ever behaved like this before. She was determined to come over here, and then she began scratching furiously at your front door. I knew Gertie was away. I knew she had some house-sitters watching over her house. I never suspected for a moment that the people that were sitting for Gertie were Lassie's original owners. Fancy that. I think she must have picked up on your scent, young man. I've grown very fond of Lassie over the last couple of months, but I can see the dog is yours, so there's not much I can do about that. So I guess I'll have to say my goodbyes to her and leave you be. I live next door, just so you know. I'm Gertie's next-door neighbour. My name is Vanessa." "Please don't go, Vanessa," my mother insisted. "This must be very hard for you to let go of a dog you've grown fond of for the last couple of months. But I can assure you your husband's completely wrong. We never did want to get rid of Lassie. We've had her for 2 years, you know. My husband brought her as a present for my son Jack over here, after much badgering." "I don't understand," the woman said with tears in her eyes. "I'm sure my husband said the owners couldn't keep Lassie because of their small children. Oh dear me, maybe I got the story all mixed up and confused. But I can see Lassie is so happy to be back with her real owners again. And it's right she should be with you. It's luck that she found you again. I'm only sorry I have to lose her like this. As I said, I've grown fond of her. She's a lovely, lovely dog." "How did you know her name was Lassie?" I asked. "Well, my husband told me her name was Lassie, of course. I assume the people who gave her to him must have told him that was her name." "Lassie was abducted," I explained. "I was walking down our street where we live. A man stopped his red Hyundai and got out of his car. He claimed he heard a pop in one of his rear wheels. He thought there might be a nail stuck in the rubber. He saw me walking down the street with Lassie. He asked me to check one of the wheels for him. When I examined the wheel, he threw Lassie into the back of his red Hyundai. He drove away with my dog. I was certain I'd never see Lassie again." "It's true," said my mother. "Jack was absolutely devastated. Heartbroken he was, that someone would abduct his dog like that in broad daylight of all things. The man in question was wearing socks with sandals, I believe. I'd never forget a detail like that." The woman grew grave, her face drained of all colour. "My husband drives a red Hyundai, and one of his worst habits is he's always wearing white socks with his sandals, and I can't stand it." The woman pulled out her cell phone and showed me a photograph. "Does this man look familiar to you?" she asked me directly. I studied the photograph. "Yes, ma'am, that's him. That's the man that abducted Lassie. I'd remember him anywhere." "This man so happens to be my husband," said the woman, her jaw tightening. "I think he's got some explaining to do, don't you?" The woman dialed a number into her cell phone, and a man answered. "What is it, love?" "It's me, Marvin. You better get over to Gertie's house at once, if you don't mind." "Is everything all right, Vanessa? You sound rather flustered. I thought Gertie was away.
Aren't there people house-sitting for her? Come over to the house right now, said the woman stiffly. There's something you need to see. It's urgent. Be right over, came the man's voice.
I will never forget the sheepish expression on Marvin's face when his wife Vanessa led him into the hallway and pointed towards Lassie, who was curled up in my arms, as if she didn't want to let me out of her sight, in case I would disappear on her again.
Could you explain what's going on here, Marvin? This young man over here, his name is Jack, claims that a man in a red Hyundai, fitting your description perfectly, abducted his dog Lassie from the neighbourhood where he lives 2 months ago. I showed him your photograph, Marvin, and he's absolutely insistent that you are the man that abducted his dog. I think you should start talking, don't you? It's very clear to me, Marvin, that this boy is the owner of Lassie. I thought you told me that the dog's owners did not want the dog anymore.
It was him that took my dog, I said, looking at Marvin. You tricked me, sir, into believing your tyre had gone flat. Then you grabbed my dog and you drove off with her in your red Hyundai. How could you do such a horrible thing, sir?
You're absolutely disgusting. You should be ashamed of yourself, said my mother, looking furious. What kind of a monster are you? My son has been grieving the loss of his dog Lassie for over 2 months. He's been in such a low place, you have no idea. If you wanted a golden retriever, why on earth didn't you buy one for yourself instead of stealing somebody else's? You live next door to Gertie. You can't be short of a bob or two. And even if you were, you don't go abducting other people's dogs.
Marvin's face reddened, and in that second he looked like a deer caught in headlights.
I'm sorry, love,
he said, turning to his wife and wilfully ignoring my mother.
It's not what you think. It's very complicated.
I could see he was trembling. He certainly had not expected a confrontation like this. I could see that Vanessa was seething. Her nostrils flared. Her eyes grew as wide as saucers.
How dare you steal this young boy's dog, Marvin, and bring her home to me, claiming the owners didn't want her any more? What the hell were you playing at? You allowed me to adopt Lassie, to grow fond of her, and now I have to give her back to her real owners. Why on earth would you do such a vindictive thing to them and to me? Anyone can see this young man loves his dog to death. Why on earth did you abduct her? It makes no sense at all. You've always been a good man, Marvin. Why would you do something so spiteful? This is not like you at all. Do I even know you? It was Gertie, love. She asked me to do this for her.
At this, me, my mother and sister stared at each other in confoundment. I could see disgust was beginning to bloom over my mother's face.
Are you telling me, my mother interjected, that my mother's sister Gertie asked you to abduct our dog? Why would she ask such a thing of you? I don't understand.
At least Marvin had the good grace to hang his head in shame.
I'm very sorry, ma'am. I told Gertie it was the wrong thing to do. I told her it was extremely cruel to abduct a young boy's dog, but she refused to listen. She wanted me to get rid of the dog. She didn't like coming to Friday night dinner at your house and getting covered in dog hairs. She disapproved of Lassie. She said you would be grateful once the dog was out of the way, and that I was doing you a big favour. Gertie asked me to find Lassie another home, to get her adopted. But when I brought Lassie home, just for a few hours or so, my wife fell for her hard, begging me to let her keep her. I couldn't refuse the wife, but I was rather terrified that Gertie would find out that I still had the dog. I had no idea Lassie would find her original owners. She's quite some dog, let me tell you. I'll give her that.
At this startling revelation, my mother was furiously angry. She began slamming her fists in the air, as if she was attacking an invisible man. It was a good job that he didn't exist, or my mother would likely have killed him on the spot.
When I get my hands on Gertie, I'm going to kill her myself, she said. See if I don't. How dare she do this to us? How dare she do this to Jack? Who the hell does she think she is? But why would you do this for Gertie? Vanessa demanded to know. Why didn't you tell her to get lost, love? You know it's wrong to take somebody else's pet. Gertie was blackmailing me, Vanessa.
Vanessa stared at her husband in disbelief. She looked horrified.
Gertie, our next-door neighbour, was blackmailing you. But why? I don't understand, Marvin. What did she have on you? Love, it's not what you think. You know that I dated Sasha for over 8 years before we actually met. Well, Sasha contacted me recently. She asked if we could meet up at a local coffee shop. She wanted some advice from me. I didn't want to tell you about this. But why? Why ever not? Why would you keep such a thing from me, Marvin? Said Vanessa, frowning. I just didn't want to upset you, love. But the rendezvous with my ex was perfectly innocent. So you're saying Gertie blackmailed you because she saw you meeting up with your ex? Is that it? That doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Marvin's face flushed bright red.
Well, we had a moment. We kissed for a second. Only a second, mind you. I realized at once it was wrong. It meant nothing. Gertie took a photograph of me kissing. She said she was going to show you the evidence of my cheating on you. But nothing happened, love. It was perfectly innocent. Hand on heart, I'm not lying.
Vanessa was furious.
Get out of my life, Marvin. When I get back to my house, I want you gone. Do you understand? Gone. Vanessa, let's talk about this, please. Don't overreact. There's nothing to talk about, Marvin. By the time I get to the house, I want you gone. You better get packed.
I watched Marcus scuttle away like a dung beetle, and I couldn't help but feel sorry for him, even though he had abducted my dog.
I must apologize profusely for what my husband has done, said Vanessa. Now you take care of Lassie, will you?
Of course, I said. We watched Vanessa walking away from Gertie's house. She looked like someone who had lost absolutely everything, and in that moment I told myself that as soon as I returned home, and as soon as Lassie came into season again, I would get her impregnated by Mr. Lehman's Labradoodle jet ski. I would give Vanessa one of Lassie's puppies. I knew how broken-hearted she must have felt to lose Lassie, after growing so attached to her, so I figured out that giving her one of Lassie's puppies would be a nice thing to do, and surprisingly enough my mother agreed to this. Lassie ended up having over 9 puppies, but they were the most adorable puppies I have ever seen in my entire life, and I'm not biased by any manner of means. I singled out a perfect female puppy for Vanessa. I put a collar on her with a pink bow and placed her in a large box. It was 8 o'clock at night by the time we'd reached the neighbourhood where Aunt Gertie lived. When my mother realized what Aunt Gertie had done, she told her that we never wanted to see her again, and she meant every word of it. So thankfully there were no longer any Friday night dinners spent with Gertie.
I know she's my mother's sister, my mother told me, but she did a terrible thing, Jack, planning Lassie's abduction like this. We don't need someone like that in our lives. And for your information, Jack, I think you're right. I bet Gertie did kill her husband for his money. It's a damn shame it can't be proved, because the woman should be locked away for good.
My heart was fluttering wildly in my chest when finally we arrived at Vanessa's house. My mother parked her car. Me, my sister and Lassie got out. Lassie was wagging her tail furiously as we walked to the front door of Vanessa's home. I knew that this impromptu visit was unexpected, as Vanessa had no idea she was about to receive a gift of a blonde bundle of fur. Vanessa opened the door, and when she saw us all standing there and Lassie at my side, her face burst into a bright smile.
Fancy seeing you all here. This is a lovely surprise. Lassie, that's you, is it?
Lassie charged up to Vanessa, wagging her tail furiously, and I watched Vanessa cradling Lassie in her arms. She almost looked tearful to see Lassie again, as if some nostalgic memories of her time spent with the dog had inadvertently been triggered.
Oh, it's good to see you, Lassie, again. Lovely to see you. Thank you for bringing her over for a visit. That is so kind of you. So very thoughtful, Jack.
Who is it, love? Came a male voice from the doorway, and then stepping out of the door was Marvin. His face coloured immediately when he saw us, because he knew exactly who we were.
I know exactly what you're all thinking, laughed Vanessa. There is no fool like an old fool. Let's just say when I told Marvin to leave me for good, I missed him so very much that I'm afraid to say I invited him back into my life. I know you probably think I'm completely crazy, but I promise you Marvin did not want to abduct your dog, Jack. It was Gertie who blackmailed him into doing it. And the truth is my husband Marvin was not cheating on me with Sasha either. I met up with the woman. She gave me her solemn word that nothing had happened between the two of them. So against all the odds, I've taken Marvin back, and I've forgiven him for what he's done. But I still don't accept that it was the right thing to do, no matter how much Gertie was blackmailing him. There are some things you should never do.
Marvin stepped forward, his face apologetic.
I'm very sorry, Jack, that I abducted your dog. I have never regretted anything more in my life. Please, will you forgive me?
I forgive you, sir. I know exactly what Gertie's like. She's a force to be reckoned with. Anyway, I've got Lassie back, and that's all that matters. But next time, sir, if you don't mind me giving you a little bit of advice, please don't be bullied into doing something that you might regret, something that is wrong. It's not worth it. Don't let anyone blackmail you again.
You're right, Jack. What you say is true. I will take that advice to heart. Have you seen Gertie around, Vanessa? My mother asked her. We don't speak to her any more, not after what she's done. Well, she's still next door. She's got herself a new fancy man. Poor sod. I can't imagine what he's got himself into. He drives around a flashy sports car, said Vanessa. But like you, we don't have anything to do with the likes of her anymore. Not after what she did. Good, I'm very glad to hear it, said my mother approvingly. That woman is absolutely toxic. Now, Jack, aren't you going to do Vanessa the honours?
In this box, Vanessa, I've got a gift for you, from Lassie, I said, handing the box over to Vanessa.
This sounds intriguing, said Vanessa, taking the box from me.
And looking inside, she let out a delighted squeal when she pulled the cutest puppy out of the box that you have ever seen.
Oh, goodness gracious me! She's so adorable! Look at her, Marvin! The cutest puppy you've ever seen! You're saying she's one of Lassie's puppies?
Yes, she is. She's one of Lassie's puppies. She's half golden retriever and half labradoodle. Vanessa's face was filled with an unbridled joy. I knew in that quintessential moment that bringing Vanessa one of Lassie's puppies had been the absolute right thing to do. The woman was absolutely elated. We drove away down the street, and I caught sight of a tall, lofty figure looking at us from behind a tree on the footpath that led to the woods. I thought I'd imagined it, but my sister saw him too. It was the Bigfoot we'd encountered on the prohibited trail. He nodded his head at us and then glided back into the woods, and I was befuddled that we'd actually seen him twice in only a few months. Was it sheer chance that he had seen us on the one night when we had randomly chosen to visit the neighbourhood? Somehow, I don't think so. I try not to think about the strange, weird woman that tried to kill my sister, that we encountered on the prohibited footpath. But I have thought about the Bigfoot so many times, too many times to mention, that saved my sister's life. But this is a story that we both know that we will take down to our graves, for we haven't shared it with anyone, until now, of course. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.